I still work the backcountry rotation at Cascade National Park, but I no longer go looking for people who don't want to be found. The problem is, I never know anymore if they're hiding or if something else is keeping them there. 3 years ago, I stopped checking the abandoned ranger station at mile marker 47. The equipment still runs, the logs still update every morning. Nobody has staffed that station in 14 years. Before I tell you what happened out there, subscribe and stay with me, and share this with someone who works in remote places or who thinks they would have handled what happened better than I did. If the specifics of what rangers find or don't find matter to you, this is worth hearing all the way through. My name is Daniel, and I have been a ranger at Cascade for 9 years. I started late, moved into the service after 8 years doing seasonal archaeology digs in the Southwest, so I brought a certain comfort with isolation and with following protocols in unmapped terrain. The park hired me because I was calm around wilderness risk and because I didn't need much social structure to function for weeks at a time. That turned out to be both the best and worst reason they could have chosen me. Cascade is roughly 860 square miles. Most of that is protected backcountry, accessible by 6 major trails and dozens of smaller spurs. We maintain radio posts at 7 key locations: the ranger station at the north entrance, the dispatch center in town, and 5 remote repeater stations positioned on high ground or in critical drainage areas. Those remote stations are serviced quarterly. They store water, emergency food, and communications equipment, and they keep basic maintenance logs. I was responsible for all 5. Some rangers get the roads and the visitor centers. I got the deep forest and the things people lose out there. The summer of 2021, a woman named Sarah Chen failed to return from a 3-day solo backpacking trip. She was 34, a physical therapist from Seattle, experienced enough to attempt the Cascade Loop without a guide. She had filed her route with the ranger station, north entrance, following the main trail to Prospector Meadows, then breaking off to ascend Graver Ridge, and returning via the eastern spur around Limestone Creek. A reasonable loop for someone with her experience. 3 days, well-marked trail system, no technical climbing. People do this trip successfully 3 or 4 times a month. She was reported missing on the 4th day when she did not arrive to collect her vehicle from the north parking lot. A vehicle search found her car right where she said it would be. Dispatch called me in from a scheduled station maintenance run. I was halfway to the Graver Ridge repeater when the call came through. I turned around and headed toward Prospector Meadows to begin search protocols. The initial search was standard. 8 rangers over 2 days, grid patterns from the last confirmed point, search dogs, and an aerial sweep. We found her emergency whistle caught on a branch maybe a quarter-mile off the northbound trail, which suggested she might have veered into the forest pursuing something or fleeing something. We called in the county rescue team. We searched for another 4 days. Weather was perfect. Visibility was excellent. We should have found her. We found almost nothing. On the 5th day of the search, I was leading a team through the easternmost grid quadrant, the area closest to the Limestone Creek drainage. The creek is rough terrain, deep channels, cut through sandstone, slippery rocks, sections where you cannot move without wading, so it is not a place people choose, but it is a place where someone who is injured or disoriented might end up. I was approaching the creek with my partner that morning, a younger ranger named Marcus who had worked park search and rescue for 3 seasons. The forest in that section is dense, mostly Douglas fir and hemlock, and the ground is thick with moss and old fallen wood. It was maybe 8:30 in the morning, which means the light was coming in at an angle, creating that strange quality where shadows are deep but visibility is still decent. Marcus was about 20 feet ahead of me on the trail, and he stopped suddenly, not cautiously, stopped like he had run into a wall. I remember asking what he saw. He did not answer for several seconds. He was just staring ahead. Then he said, "There is a marker. On the Cascade Loop, the trail markers are orange blazes painted on trees every 100 meters or so. Finding a marker is not unusual, but the marker Marcus had found was in the wrong place. It was on the trail leading away from the search grid, pointing back toward Prospector Meadows the way we had come from. And it was fresh. The paint was bright. I could smell the solvent from 3 feet away. I knew those blazes. I had walked that trail once a month for 7 years. That marker did not exist the previous month when I had walked that exact section. More than that, the tree it was painted on was a young hemlock, maybe 20 years old, with no previous blazes or maintenance marks. Someone had specifically chosen that tree and painted that marker in the last few weeks. Marcus and I discussed it. We considered the possibility that the initial search team had missed marking a trail junction, even though the maps showed no junction at that location. We considered that someone had vandalized the trail, which was not common, but not unheard of either. We photographed the marker, noted the coordinates, and reported it. The search coordinator noted it as a potential sign of activity and told us to continue the grid. We did not find Sarah Chen that day or any day after. The search continued for 9 days total. The county rescue team called it off first. Then dispatch officially suspended active search, though rangers continued occasional patrols of the area for another month. There was no sign of her body, no additional equipment, no new markers. It was as if she had simply stepped out of the physical world between point A and point B. What happened instead was that I became concerned with those trail markers. Markers did not simply appear. They required planning, equipment, and knowledge of the terrain. So I decided to check my station logs, my notes from previous maintenance runs, any record of markers being changed or maintained in the eastern sectors. The station at mile marker 47 sits on a bench about 800 feet above Limestone Creek drainage, positioned in a small clearing with a view of the ridgeline to the east. It is a metal structure, roughly 12 by 8 feet, built in 1987. It houses a radio repeater, a backup power system, emergency supplies, and a logbook where rangers record observations, maintenance, and any unusual activity. The station is accessed via a maintenance trail that splits from the eastern spur about 4 miles northeast of Prospector Meadows. When I reached the station, I had expected to spend maybe 2 hours doing my routine check, recording radio function, testing the backup battery, noting any equipment decay, and scanning the logbook for maintenance records or reports from other rangers. The logbook was the thing that concerned me. The most recent entry was dated 4 months earlier, in April. I had been the ranger who wrote that entry. There should have been at least one entry since then. Probably 2 other rangers do the stations too, on rotation. I opened the book to the most recent pages, and I saw this. It is burned into my memory, which is probably why I remember the exact wording. The last entry in the book was mine from April, dated 4/17/21, noting routine maintenance, backup systems operational, everything nominal. The page after that was completely blank pages. Usually there are maybe 2 or 3 blank pages left in each book before you have to rotate to a new one. These were not blank by accident. The pages after my entry had been removed, cleanly cut out. The binding had not been damaged, so it was done carefully, with some kind of blade, a knife, probably, or a razor. I checked the equipment storage. Nothing was missing. The radio had power. The battery backup was charged. The emergency food was untouched. The spare radio I stored there was in the cabinet where I had left it. But someone had been to that station after my last visit, and someone had removed the pages from the logbook. I called dispatch and reported the situation. I said that the logbook had been tampered with, pages removed, but that I could not determine how long ago the removal had occurred. The dispatcher asked if I wanted to suspend the station and leave. I said no, I wanted to finish the maintenance check and document the equipment status. She asked if the station showed signs of break-in. I did not know how to answer that. There was no obvious damage. The door was still locked, but someone had clearly been inside. I took photographs of the logbook, the binding, the cut pages. I noted the date on my own entry and the equipment status. I left a new logbook in case the old one needed to be collected for evidence, though at the time I was not sure what evidence anyone would be examining. Then I secured the station and made the 2-hour hike out to the trail junction. That night, I considered several possibilities. 1. Someone had vandalized the station, which was rare but not impossible. 2. Park administration had reviewed the logs and removed entries for some reason, which made no sense. 3. Someone who knew the station existed, who knew the code or had found a way to get past the lock, had been there recently and had intentionally removed entries from the logbook. I did not tell Marcus or the rest of the search team about the removed pages. Looking back now, I should have, but at the time, it felt like a separate problem from the missing hiker case. I did not see how a tampered logbook connected to Sarah Chen's disappearance. I was thinking about this as a vandalism issue, a trespasser problem, not as part of something larger. 5 days later, after the official search had been suspended, I went back to check on the station with my own equipment. I wanted to install a simple camera. Nothing sophisticated, just a battery-powered trail camera mounted to a tree opposite the station entrance. I had done work like this before during archaeological surveys to monitor dig sites and prevent looting. I had the camera in my pack, the batteries were fresh, and I had a strap to secure it to a tree. I did not ask permission. This was partly because I did not want to sound paranoid, partly because I was curious about what the official response would be if I reported vandalism at a station that was supposedly secure. I hiked out to Marker 47 on a Thursday morning, installed the camera pointing at the station door, and set it to record motion-triggered images every 10 seconds if anything approached. I would return in 2 weeks to retrieve the card. 14 days later, I collected the camera. The memory card had about 400 images. The first 200 were wildlife, deer moving through the clearing at dusk, birds, a small mammal, nothing significant. The next 150 or so were blank or showed only shadows. The last 50 images recorded motion at the station door. They were dated 3:52 a.m., which was wrong. The camera's date stamp was corrupted or set incorrectly, but the images showed the station door opening and someone moving inside. The quality was not great. The camera's infrared mode made everything look like it was underwater, but I could see a figure in dark clothing entering the station. The images were taken in sequence over about 8 minutes. Then the figure exited, and there was no more motion after that. I could not determine when this had happened. The date stamp was corrupted, but the images were on the memory card, which meant they had been recorded sometime during the 2-week window. Someone had accessed the station. Someone had entered at night and spent several minutes inside. I did something then that I regret, though I am not sure what else I could have done. I erased the images. I reformatted the memory card. I removed the camera and packed it away. Then I drove to the ranger station and spoke with Jim Kellerman, the station chief. Jim had been chief ranger at Cascade for 12 years. He was competent, careful, and serious about protocol. If I told him that someone was accessing secure equipment stations, he would launch an investigation. There would be questions about how someone could bypass the locks, whether this was related to the missing hiker case, whether we needed to call county law enforcement. The search was already over. Sarah Chen was officially a missing person, and the case was closed. I did not want to turn this into a different kind of problem. Instead, I told Jim that I wanted to recommend an upgrade to the station locks. I said that the current system was old, that the key system had not been updated since the 1980s, and that I was concerned about access security. I suggested we install new locks and issue updated keys to all personnel. Jim agreed that it was a good idea. He put me in charge of organizing the upgrade. Over the next 3 weeks, I had new locks installed at all 5 remote stations. We issued new keys to the 4 rangers who regularly accessed them. The system was much more secure. In theory, nobody without an updated key could get inside. 2 months later, when I went back to service the station at Marker 47, I found the lock had been picked, not broken. Picked. The lock mechanism was intact, but the tumblers had been manipulated. I did not open the door. I called dispatch and reported that the lock at Station 47 had been compromised. They asked how I could tell it had been picked rather than damaged. I explained that I had seen locked picked before during archaeology work, vandals breaking into protected sites, and this showed the same signs. Clean manipulation with no visible damage. Dispatch escalated. Jim arrived that afternoon with the county sheriff's deputy. We opened the station together. Nothing was missing. The equipment was untouched. The new logbook I had left was still on the desk, and it was full of entries from various rangers doing routine maintenance and repairs. 3 entries per month, which was normal, but one page was different. Approximately halfway through the logbook, there was a single entry that was not in anyone's handwriting that I recognized. The entry was dated 4 weeks earlier, on a date when no ranger should have been servicing the station. The entry was short. It said, "Why do you keep trying to find her? She chose to stay." Marker was warning. "Turn around next time." The handwriting was deliberate and slow, like someone writing carefully. The message was clear. Someone was telling me that Sarah Chen had deliberately disappeared, that the strange marker was a warning, and that I should abandon any further investigation. I remember touching the page with the tips of my fingers, not wanting to smudge it, but knowing that my fingerprints were probably already on the logbook. The deputy took photographs. Jim looked genuinely alarmed. He took the logbook as evidence, called the county sheriff's office, and told them that we might have an active crime on park property. That evening, the sheriff's department sent a detective to interview me. She was a woman named Carolyn Price, maybe 50 years old, with the kind of patient demeanor that cops develop after they have heard thousands of people explain things badly. She sat in the ranger station office and asked me to walk her through everything: the missing hiker, the strange marker, the tampered logbook, the camera, the picked lock, and the message. When I finished, she set down her notes and asked me what I thought was happening. I told her honestly that I did not know. I said that someone knew Sarah Chen was missing, someone knew about the search efforts, and someone wanted to communicate with me specifically. I said that the message implied Sarah Chen was deliberately staying out in the park rather than trying to return, which did not match her profile as someone with a family, a job, a life in Seattle. But I had no explanation for how or why someone would choose to stay in the wilderness instead of walking back to their car. Detective Price took the logbook and the camera and said she would send them to the state crime lab for examination. She interviewed Jim and Marcus. She spent time looking at the maps, at the location of Station 47, at the search grids, and at the placement of the strange marker I had found. And then, nothing. 2 weeks went by with no follow-up. I called and asked where the investigation stood. The department told me they had sent the items for analysis, and they would be in touch when they had results. 2 months passed. I did not hear anything. During that time, I continued my station maintenance rotations. I serviced the other 4 stations without incident, but I avoided going to Station 47. I found reasons to send Marcus instead, or I would request coverage from another ranger. Then, in October, I received a call at home from Detective Price. She said they had completed the analysis of the items I had submitted. The handwriting in the logbook could not be matched to any known individuals, but the lab had found something else. The ink used to write that specific entry was from a pen manufactured in 1989. The paper it was written on was from the original logbook that had been installed at the station in 1987. This meant the entry had likely been written years earlier, not recently, and had been added to a different logbook during one of the page replacement cycles that happened every few years. In other words, someone had written that message in an old logbook decades ago. It had been sitting somewhere unnoticed, mixed in with archived station logs. When I had replaced the tampered logbook in the station, this old entry had somehow been transferred with the new one, or someone had intentionally placed it inside knowing I would find it. I asked Detective Price if this meant the entry was unrelated to Sarah Chen's disappearance. She paused before answering. She said that she did not know. She said that the entry's age actually made it more troubling, not less, because it suggested that something unusual had been happening at that location for a much longer period than anyone had realized. She said they were still investigating, but that they had no leads and no evidence that Sarah Chen was at Station 47 or anywhere connected to it. She asked me if I wanted to continue working at Cascade. She said it in a careful way, like she was trying to ask if I felt safe. I told her that I did, and I meant it. But I did not feel entirely honest about that answer. After that conversation, I began researching the history of Station 47. It was a process of pulling old reports, talking to retired rangers, and looking through park records that went back decades. What I learned was that Station 47 had a reputation among long-term park staff. Several rangers over the years had reported strange activity near the station. In 1994, a ranger named Steve Halverson reported finding the station door open, but nothing was missing, and there were no signs of forced entry. He reported feeling disturbed, though he could not articulate why. In 2003, another ranger noted in the log that the radio had been set to an unusual frequency, one that was not a standard park channel. The shift back seemed to have been done deliberately. In 2009, a ranger reported that the emergency supplies had been reorganized but not taken. Most interesting were the older entries from the station's earliest years. The original logbook from 1987 and 1988 contained several notes about footprints appearing around the station in heavy snow, with no discernible origin point. They seemed to materialize from the forest without following any trail, and there were 3 instances of rangers noting that the eastern ridge line, the ridge you could see from the station's clearing, seemed to have changed slightly. Trees appeared to be in different positions, landmarks shifted, but these observations were vague and scattered across years, so they had been dismissed as faulty memory or observational error. What I realized, reading through decades of logs, was that the station had a long history of small violations, not major incidents, nothing that required investigation or closure, just small wrongnesses, little inconsistencies, things that could be explained away individually but formed a pattern if you looked at them together. I began spending time at the station with different intentions. I was not looking for Sarah Chen anymore, though that case had never been officially closed. I was trying to understand what Station 47 actually was, why it occupied that specific location, why it seemed to attract attention, why it served as some kind of marker or boundary. The location had been chosen in 1987 because the elevation and geography made it ideal for the radio repeater. It could transmit and receive signals across the entire eastern sector of the park. But I began to wonder if that was the whole reason. I started looking at maps, trying to understand if Station 47 occupied a special position relative to the trail system, relative to the places where people went missing or disappeared in the park. I know this is going to sound like I was becoming obsessed, and I was. I spent my free time and part of my work time researching park records, looking for connections between missing persons and Station 47, looking for patterns in the trails people took before they vanished. And I found something. Between 1987 and 2021, there had been 43 missing person cases in Cascade National Park. 43 people who went into the park and did not come out, or who came out long after they were expected, or who were found in places that did not match where they said they were going. I pulled the records for every single one. 31 of those 43 cases involved people who had, at some point, been within 5 miles of Station 47, or who had accessed the park via trails that passed through the search radius around the station. That meant that the station and the area around it were statistically connected to the majority of missing person incidents in the park. I do not expect this to make sense. I know it sounds like I was finding patterns that were not really there. That is what Jim Kellerman told me when I brought my research to him. He said that Station 47 was centrally located and that most of the park's major trails passed through its zone, so of course missing person cases would be geographically correlated with it. That was simple geography, not evidence of anything unusual. But he was wrong about one thing. He said I should stop investigating and return to normal ranger duties. He was concerned about my judgment. He suggested I take some time off. He was not angry with me, but he was worried. He asked me not to access Station 47 anymore without backup and without prior notification to dispatch. So I stopped researching. I returned to normal duties, but I did not stop thinking about it. I could not stop thinking about Sarah Chen, about that marker in the middle of the trail, about the message in the logbook, about the picked lock and the missing entries. I could not stop thinking about why someone would tell me that she had chosen to stay and what that would even mean. Then, in early December, something happened that changed everything. I was leading a group of volunteers on a trail maintenance project, clearing down trees and removing invasive plant species from the main Cascade Loop. It was heavy work, satisfying work. the kind of thing that gets you out of your head and into your body. We were about 3 miles into the loop, moving eastbound, when I found something caught on a branch. It was a fabric tag, the kind of tag that comes attached to new hiking boots with the size and the model number printed on it. The label said Merrill, size 7, women's. The tag was sun-bleached and weathered, but it had not been there in the spring. The branch it was caught on was relatively exposed, and I walked that section regularly. I would have noticed it. But Sarah Chen wore size 8 boots. I knew this because her missing person report included her gear list. She carried Merrill boots, but size 8, not size 7. I detached the tag without drawing attention from the volunteers and put it in my pocket. That evening I took it to my cabin and looked at it under good light. The printing was faded but still visible. The tag had been manufactured less than 2 years earlier, which meant the boots were relatively new. But I had no way of knowing who had been wearing them. I did not report the tag. I did not tell anyone I had found it. I called it curiosity, but I was starting to violate my own protocols. A ranger is supposed to report anything unusual. I was instead starting to become the person who knew something, who had found something, who was looking for answers in places I was not supposed to look. Over the next few weeks, I began taking my breaks on trails closer to Station 47. I would claim I was checking marker conditions or testing radio reception, but I was actually walking the territory around the station, looking for more evidence. I found a broken water bottle. I found what might have been part of a backpack. I found a piece of rope tied to a tree, frayed at both ends like it had been cut. Each item was ambiguous. None of it proved anything, but it was all there, and it was all concentrated within a few miles of Station 47. I also found something else, or rather, I found something that was not there anymore. The strange marker that Marcus and I had discovered during the search, the fresh orange blaze on the young hemlock tree. I wanted to verify it one more time. So in early January, I returned to that exact spot. I had the GPS coordinates from the search report. I had marked it on my personal map. I was certain I could find it again. I found the tree. But the marker was gone. The blaze had been removed. I could see the pale ghost of where the paint had been, a slight discoloration on the bark where the orange pigment had been scraped away. But someone had deliberately painted over or removed that marker. Someone had gone to the effort of returning to that spot and erasing the evidence that it had ever existed. That was when I stopped going to work for a while. I took a medical leave. I told Jim I was having anxiety and that I needed to step back. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I was starting to believe something that I could not afford to believe, because if I believed it, I would have to act on it, and if I acted on it, I would destroy my career and my reputation as a ranger. I took 4 weeks off. I sat in my cabin. I went through all of my notes, all of my photographs, all of the documents I had collected. I read through decades of station logs. I looked at maps. I tried to construct a coherent explanation for what was happening at Station 47, why people disappeared, why someone was trying to discourage me from looking, why the landscape itself seemed to be part of the story. And I came to a conclusion that I cannot fully justify even now, but that has shaped how I work and how I understand my job. I think Station 47 is not just a location. I think it is a boundary. I think that between the lodge of those coordinates and a few miles in each direction, something is different about the way the world works. I think that people who pass through that area sometimes find themselves in a place that is not quite the same park they entered. The trails seem different. The distances are wrong. The landmarks shift. And some people, some portion of people who pass through that boundary do not come back out the same way they went in. I think Sarah Chen crossed that boundary and ended up somewhere else. Not dead, not kidnapped, but displaced into a version of the park that does not quite intersect with the normal one. I think the marker was a warning. placed by someone else who understood what that place was and did not want other people stumbling through unprepared. I think the message in the logbook was old, written by someone decades earlier who had experienced the same thing and was trying to warn future rangers about what they would find. I think the picked lock and the removed log pages were someone trying to conceal the evidence of what happens there. Possibly someone who works, or has worked as a ranger. Someone who understands park systems and who wants to keep the station open because something depends on it being open. I returned to work after 4 weeks. Jim asked if I was doing better. I told him I was. He asked if I was still interested in investigating the missing hiker case. I told him I was not, that I thought the case was probably closed to investigation, and that I wanted to return to my regular duties. He looked relieved. Since then, I have maintained the 5 remote stations as required, but I am not the one who services Station 47 anymore. I requested a formal transfer away from that sector, citing the need for a longer rotation and less time in that particular area. My request was approved. Now, Marcus handles Station 47. I am careful not to ask him about it. I do not look at his maintenance reports. If something unusual appears in the logs, I do not read it closely. I still work for the park. I still love this work. But I have changed how I do it. I no longer follow every lead on missing persons. I no longer investigate every unusual report from the back country. I file my reports, I collect my data, I maintain my stations, but I am careful not to discover things that cannot be explained through normal means. I have not hiked to Station 47 in 14 months. The day I decided not to go there anymore was clear and cold, about 10 degrees. I had driven out to the trailhead, checked my equipment, and started walking the maintenance trail. And somewhere around the halfway point, I stopped. I did not have a reason. I just felt certain that I should not continue, that going to that station, that approaching that place would change something fundamental about my understanding of where I work and what I am responsible for. So I turned around, I drove back to town, I filed a report saying that I had canceled the maintenance run due to a personal emergency, which was not quite a lie. That same day, Marcus completed his regularly scheduled service run at Station 47. His report came through the normal dispatch channel. Everything nominal, no unusual activity, standard maintenance, new entry in the logbook documenting his visit, except for one thing. At the bottom of the logbook, below his entry, someone else had written something. The handwriting was different from the old message. It was newer. It was clear and direct. It said, "Marcus knows. Let him keep knowing. Stop sending the frightened one." I do not know what it means. I do not know who wrote it. I do not know if the message is directed at me or at Station 47 or at something else entirely. I know that no one but Marcus and whoever wrote that message would have been at the station on that day. I know that Marcus has never mentioned the message to me. I know that when I try to ask him about his rotations at Station 47, he changes the subject. I still take the same road to work every day. I still drive past the turnoff that leads to the trail for Station 47. I still receive the maintenance schedule and know exactly when that station needs servicing. But I have built a life around not going there, around not knowing what happens there, around accepting that some places in the park follow different rules than others, and that the smartest thing a ranger can do is learn which places to stop investigating. Sarah Chen was officially declared deceased in absentia 5 years after her disappearance. Her family held a memorial service. They scattered her ashes at a viewpoint on the north side of the park, in a place that probably has its own rules, its own boundaries, its own history of strange occurrences that we have all agreed not to talk about. I attend that viewpoint sometimes. I stand there and I try to communicate an apology, though I am not sure for what. For not finding her, for giving up looking, for understanding that finding her might not have meant bringing her back, for accepting that the park keeps what it wants to keep. The camera I installed is still in a storage shed at the ranger station. The memory card has not been reformatted since I erased those images, Sometimes I think about looking at it again, about trying to enhance those infrared photographs, about trying to see the face of the person who entered Station 47 in the middle of the night. But I know that if I do, I will have to act on what I know. I will have to ask questions I cannot ask. I will have to look at areas of the park that have taught me they do not want to be looked at. So I do not look. I maintain the stations. I respond to emergency calls. I keep people safe on the trails I am assigned to. I do not wander. I do not explore. I do not get curious about the places that do not want to be understood. And every night I still listen to the radio transmissions coming from the 5 stations. The signals are strongest at Station 47. That station has always had the clearest reception, the strongest signal, the most reliable connectivity. I keep my job. I keep my sanity. And I keep my distance from the place where Sarah Chen chose to stay, or was taken, or found her way to, or simply ceased to exist in a way that anyone with my level of clearance could possibly confirm. I am a ranger at Cascade National Park, and I know where not to look. That is the part of the job they never mention during training. There are other accounts in our files, other cases, other disappearances. I cannot include everything here. Some of it is too recent. Some of it is still under investigation. There are other rangers who know more than I do, who have seen stranger things than I have, who are equally unwilling to talk about what the park actually is. For anyone who wants to understand the deeper context, the full archived account is available to channel members. I have documented more than just my own experience. There are patterns, there are maps, there are logbook entries that go back decades. There is enough evidence to suggest that certain areas of this park operate under rules we do not fully understand and were never meant to investigate. If you work in a remote place, if you have hiked into areas that feel different, if you have noticed that distance and direction seem unreliable in certain locations, if you have felt the sense that some areas should be left alone, please keep this story to yourself. Do not investigate. Do not publish your findings. Do not contact park management. Just accept that the place is marked, that it is protected in its way, and that the best service you can offer is to become part of the silence that keeps it hidden. I still take the same road to work. I just have learned not to follow it when it leads toward the places where the rules change. I still work search and rescue at Cascade National Park, but I no longer respond to injury callouts from the Eastern Loop trails without asking exactly where the injured person was found. The medical records are inconsistent with the locations they report. The trauma patterns do not match the injuries people should suffer from falling on marked trails. 3 people in the last 2 years have been treated for injuries that could only come from being attacked by something large, but they were found walking out of the forest on their own, unable or unwilling to explain what happened. Before I get into this, if you've been following along with these stories, subscribe and share this with someone who hikes in national parks or who thinks they would ask better questions than the people doing this job. And if you are a medical professional or an emergency response coordinator listening to this, I want you to think carefully about what you would do if the official explanation for injuries did not match the evidence of the injuries themselves. My name is Rebecca Torres. I have been a search and rescue coordinator for Cascade National Park for 11 years. I manage incident response, coordinate rescue teams, handle casualty evacuation, and compile all wilderness emergency data for the park. I came into this work from emergency medicine. I spent 10 years as an ER nurse before transitioning to outdoor emergency response. So I have significant experience with trauma, wound assessment, and determining mechanism of injury from clinical presentation. Mechanism of injury is fundamental to emergency medicine. It is how we predict what injuries to expect based on the event that caused them. If someone says they fell while hiking, we look for specific injuries: ankle fractures, lower leg fractures, hip injuries, maybe some lacerations from rocks. If someone says they were attacked by a bear, we see defensive wounds on the arms, deep puncture wounds, tissue loss from the face or shoulders, blunt trauma to the head and ribs from powerful strikes. If someone fell from height, we see crush injuries, spine trauma, internal organ damage. Mechanism determines presentation. The problem at Cascade started small, with one case that was unusual enough to flag, but not unusual enough to demand investigation. It was June of 2022. A woman named Jennifer Morse came down from a trail in the eastern sector around mid-afternoon, walking under her own power, alert and oriented, but in significant pain. She reported that she had fallen while hiking the Graver Ridge Loop and had suffered a laceration to her left leg. Park visitors had seen her limping along the main trail toward the visitor center and had called it in as a potential injury case. When she arrived at our first aid station, I was the coordinator on duty. I examined the injury. It was a deep gash, roughly 4 inches long, located on the outer aspect of her left calf. The wound had stopped bleeding but was still seeping, and it was clearly deep. I could see subcutaneous fat in the wound bed. It would require sutures, probably more than I could do in the field. I cleaned it, applied pressure dressing, and arranged evacuation to the hospital in town. While I was treating the wound, I asked Jennifer the standard questions about how the injury occurred. She said she had tripped on a root, stumbled, and fallen against a sharp rock on the edge of the trail. A straightforward fall mechanism. Believable. The kind of thing that happens regularly on mountain trails. But the wound bothered me. The laceration was too deep and too clean for a fall against a jagged rock. Rock edges are rough, irregular. They create jagged, abrasive wound margins. This wound had relatively clean edges, almost surgical in appearance. The depth was consistent with a single, severe cut, rather than blunt force trauma from a fall. It looked like it had been made by something sharp and narrow, a knife blade possibly, or something equally precise. I documented this in my report. I wrote that the reported mechanism did not perfectly align with the injury pattern, and that the wound suggested a sharp object rather than blunt trauma from a rock. But I did not make an accusation. I simply noted the discrepancy and filed it. Jennifer was treated at the hospital and released. She went back to Seattle. The case closed. The second incident was 4 months later, in October. A man named David Reinhardt came out of the wilderness, reporting an injury to his shoulder. He said he had slipped on wet rocks while crossing a stream and had fallen hard against a boulder. He had a laceration on the outer aspect of his shoulder, maybe 3 inches long, deep enough to expose muscle tissue. Another fall. Another mechanism that did not match the wound. This laceration was also too clean, too precise. It was the kind of cut you would get from something narrow and sharp, applied with considerable force, like a knife, like a blade, not like a fall against a rock. I treated David, arranged evacuation, and filed another report noting the mechanism injury mismatch. This time I also included a note suggesting that David be questioned about the actual injury cause, in case he had experienced a different kind of emergency interpersonal violence, self-harm, or some other circumstance he was not disclosing. By the time the third case came in early December, I was not just noticing the pattern, I was actively concerned about it. The third patient was a woman named Amy Chen. She came into the ranger station reporting injuries to her arm and shoulder. She was in severe pain and in mild shock. Her injuries were extensive: a deep laceration on the upper arm, a puncture wound on her shoulder, and a series of parallel cuts on her forearm that looked almost like claw marks, except they were too precise, too evenly spaced, too deliberate. Amy reported that she had encountered a bear on the eastern loop trails. She said the bear had attacked her, and she had managed to escape by running toward the trail and screaming. She was found by other hikers about a mile from where the attack supposedly occurred. Except there had been no bear attack. I knew this because bears at Cascade are tracked and monitored. There are approximately 47 bears in the park, and we know their territories and their movement patterns. No bear had been reported in the area where Amy said the attack occurred, and more importantly, the wound pattern did not match a bear attack. A bear attack creates specific injuries. The teeth make puncture wounds with a characteristic spacing. The claws create parallel lacerations, but they are deep, widely spaced, and accompanied by massive crushing injuries and tissue loss. They are devastating wounds. What Amy had was different. The marks were precise. They were parallel but close together, like something with many thin blades. They were severe but not consistent with an animal attack. I examined Amy carefully. The cuts on her forearm had even spacing between them, like they were made by something with regularly spaced points. The puncture wound on her shoulder was too precise to be a claw. The laceration on her arm was too clean. When I asked Amy directly if she had actually been attacked by a bear, she hesitated. She looked genuinely afraid, but not of me. She said yes, that was what happened. She said the bear had come at her quickly. She said she had run, and the bear had stopped pursuing her after a few hundred yards. But her story was not consistent with her injuries or with the wildlife data, and her fear seemed to be about something other than a bear encounter. I treated Amy's wounds, arranged evacuation, and this time I did something different. I filed a report, but I also called the investigating ranger Daniel, the ranger I mentioned in the previous account, and asked him to follow up with Amy directly. I told him that I had concerns about the stated mechanism of injury, and that I wanted his perspective on the story. Daniel called me back the next day. He said he had spoken with Amy, and she had maintained that a bear had attacked her, but her answers to follow-up questions had been evasive. She would not explain exactly where on the trail the attack had occurred. She was reluctant to return to the area. She said she did not want to file an official bear attack report with the state wildlife department. This was unusual. Actual bear attacks are serious incidents, and people who survive them usually want to report the attack so that the bear can be located and managed. Amy seemed to want to minimize the incident and move on. I compiled the 3 cases and began doing research. I looked through park injury reports going back 5 years. I was looking for patterns, injuries with inconsistent mechanisms, precise lacerations, wounds that seemed to come from sharp objects rather than falls or animal attacks. What I found was alarming. There were more cases, many more. Going back through the injury reports, I found 17 incidents over 5 years where visitors or rangers had reported injuries that did not match the stated mechanism. The injuries were concentrated in specific areas: the eastern loop trails, the Limestone Creek drainage, and the high ridges near the Graver Ridge access points. The wound patterns varied, but they shared characteristics: precision, depth, and inconsistency with the reported cause. Some had been treated as potential self-harm cases. Some had been documented as possible assault or interpersonal violence. Most had been accepted at face value as falls, slips, or animal encounters. But collectively, they suggested something else. They suggested a pattern of injury coming from a specific cause that people were either not recognizing or were deliberately concealing. I brought this analysis to Jim Kellerman, the park chief. I presented the data, the cases, the pattern. I told him that I was concerned about an unreported source of injury in the park, and I recommended that we conduct a formal investigation into the mechanism of these injuries and review all future cases from the affected areas with heightened scrutiny. Jim listened carefully. He looked at my documentation, and then he told me that he appreciated my attention to detail, but that I was making connections that were not there. He said that the park had thousands of visitors annually, and a small percentage would have injuries. That percentage would follow normal statistical distribution across different injury types and mechanisms. He said that my correlation of the cases was probably a result of selection bias. I was noticing the cases that fit my hypothesis and overlooking the cases that did not. He told me not to pursue this further. He said that public speculation about mysterious injuries would cause unnecessary alarm and could damage the park's reputation and visitor numbers. He said that if I had evidence of a specific crime or a specific hazard, I should report it through proper channels, but that vague concerns about injury patterns were not actionable. I accepted his decision, but I did not stop paying attention. Over the next year, I continued to document injury cases. I continued to track the locations and the mechanisms, and the pattern became more pronounced, not less. By mid-2023, I had documented 43 injury incidents over the previous 2 years, with wound characteristics that seemed inconsistent with the reported mechanism. Of those 43, 38 occurred in the eastern sector of the park, the sector that includes the Limestone Creek drainage, the high ridges, and the areas around Station 47. I also started noticing something else. People who were injured in that area exhibited a specific behavioral pattern. They would report the injury, but they would minimize it. They would not want to pursue an official investigation. They would not want to file complaints with park management. They would not want to return to the area. Most significantly, they would not want to discuss what actually happened. When I asked direct questions about the injury mechanism, they would become anxious. They would provide vague answers. They would stick to an initial story even when the story did not align with clinical evidence. It was as if they had agreed on a story and were committed to maintaining it, regardless of how implausible it was. In October of 2023, I attended a meeting with Daniel, the ranger I mentioned, and discovered that he had been researching the same areas for different reasons. We discussed our findings privately, after hours, away from the ranger station. Daniel told me about his theory regarding Station 47, about the boundary, about the missing hiker case. He was careful not to accuse anyone or to make claims he could not support, but he had come to a conclusion similar to mine. Something in that area was causing harm, and the park management did not want it acknowledged or investigated. I asked Daniel if he thought the injuries were being deliberately inflicted by a person or persons unknown. He said he did not know. He said the injuries were too precise and too consistent to be accidental. He said they seemed purposeful, but he could not explain the purpose or the mechanism. I asked him if he thought the injured people were telling the truth about what happened. He said he thought they were lying to protect themselves or to protect someone else, or possibly to protect the park itself by not making public what had harmed them. After that conversation, I made a decision. I was going to conduct my own investigation. Not officially, not through park channels, but personally. I was going to try to understand what was happening in that eastern sector, and I was going to try to interview people who had been injured there. Over the next 6 months, I tracked down 7 of the people who had suffered injuries with the inconsistent mechanisms. I contacted them by phone, told them I was following up on their cases for medical reasons, and asked if they would be willing to discuss their experiences. 3 of them refused to talk to me. 4 of them agreed to speak with me, on the condition that the conversations remain confidential and that I would not share their information with park management. The first person I interviewed was David Reinhardt, the man with the shoulder laceration from October of 2022. I called him at his home in Portland. He was guarded at first, but when I explained that I was concerned about his safety and the safety of other hikers, he gradually opened up. David told me that the official story that he had fallen against a rock was false. He said that he had been hiking alone on the Eastern Loop, had taken a turn toward Limestone Creek for water, and had become temporarily disoriented about direction. He said the terrain seemed to shift. He said landmarks that he expected to see were not where they should have been. While he was trying to reorient himself, he said he had encountered something. He was deliberately vague about what. He said it was not a bear. He said it was not a person. He said it was something that emerged from the trees and moved toward him with clear intent. He said it was fast. He said it moved in a way that he could not explain. And then, he said, he felt pain in his shoulder, a sharp, cutting pain, and he ran. He ran, he said, and he did not stop until he reached the main trail. He did not look back. He did not see what had caused the injury. But he knew that something had attacked him, and he knew that if he had not run, it would have done something worse. I asked David if he had reported this attack to park management. He said no. I asked why. He said that no one would believe him, and that even if they did, he was not certain what he had encountered was something that park management could handle. He said that the injury was treated, he was fine, and he had no intention of returning to that area. He said that was the end of it. The second person I interviewed was Amy Chen, the woman who reported the bear attack. Amy was more reluctant to speak, but she eventually agreed. She told me a similar story. She had been hiking the eastern loop. She had deviated from the trail to explore a side drainage. The terrain had become confusing. She had felt like she was moving in a direction that should take her back to the trail, but the trail was not where it should have been. And then she had encountered something. Amy was even less specific than David. She said she did not want to describe it. She said that describing it made it more real, and she wanted to move past the experience. She said that whatever it was, it had caused her injuries, and she had been fortunate to escape. She said that she had learned her lesson. Some areas of the park should be left alone. She said she would never return. The third person I spoke with was Jennifer Morse, the woman with the leg laceration. Jennifer was the most open. She told me that she had deliberately stepped off the trail to investigate something she had seen. She said she had seen what looked like a structure in the forest, something that should not be there. She said she had moved toward it to get a closer look. That was when she had felt the pain. She said it was sudden, precise, and severe. She said it felt like being cut by something very sharp. She said she had not seen what caused it. She said she had immediately turned and run back to the trail. I asked Jennifer if she had seen the structure she was investigating. She said no, that she had not made it far enough. I asked her if she remembered the location. She said she did not, that the terrain in that area did not seem to follow consistent geography. She said that when she tried to recall exactly where she had been, the memory felt slippery. She said she could not construct a reliable mental map of that location. I asked Jennifer if she thought she had been attacked by an animal. She said no. She said the wound was too precise for an animal. She said it felt purposeful. She said she believed something in that area had deliberately harmed her, possibly to drive her away, possibly for another reason she could not understand. After those interviews, I had a working hypothesis. Something was living in the eastern sector of the park, probably in the area around Station 47 and the high ridges. This something was causing precise, sharp-edged injuries to people who encountered it. The injured people were hiding the true nature of their injuries, possibly because they were afraid of not being believed, possibly because they had been warned or threatened, possibly because they understood that reporting the truth would lead to investigation that would disrupt something they felt should remain undisturbed. The injuries themselves suggested a mechanism that was orderly and consistent. If I had to describe the weapon or tool that was creating these injuries, I would say it was something with a sharp edge or multiple sharp points. A blade, multiple blades, something used with deliberation and control. I did not know if this was a person or a creature. I did not know if it was attacking in defense of territory or if it was hunting. I did not know why. It had caused injuries, but had not killed anyone. But I knew that it was real, that it was in the park, and that park management did not want it acknowledged. In January of 2024, I made a decision that violated my professional ethics and my duty to the park. I decided to go into the eastern sector myself, specifically to the area around Limestone Creek where most of the injuries had occurred, and I decided to try to encounter whatever was causing the injuries. I understand now that this was an irrational decision. I was motivated by professional frustration, by anger at the institutional denial, by a desire to have proof that something was actually there. I was also motivated by something else, something harder to name. I was motivated by a need to understand, and I was willing to take considerable personal risk to achieve that understanding. I told no one what I was planning. I filed a normal work itinerary saying I was going to service the remote stations in the eastern sector. I packed a day pack with water, emergency supplies, communication equipment, and a knife for self-defense. I drove to the trailhead and started hiking around 4 in the morning, before dawn. The hike to Limestone Creek from the eastern access is about 4 miles. The terrain is steep, heavily forested, and the trail becomes increasingly difficult to follow as you approach the creek itself. I moved slowly, deliberately, paying attention to the landscape and my position. I was trying to make myself discoverable. I was trying to move into the territory where people had been injured. The morning was cool and quiet. The forest was absolutely silent. No birds, no small animals moving through the underbrush. Just my footsteps and my breathing. The silence was profound enough to be noticeable, and it made me aware of how unusual it was. Even on quiet mornings, there is some ambient sound in a forest. This was different. This was the absence of sound. I reached Limestone Creek around 8 o'clock. The creek is narrow at this point, moving fast over smooth stones. The terrain is rugged. The creek has cut deeply into the landscape, creating steep banks and narrow passages. I stood at the water's edge and tried to understand the geography. Looking at my map, I should have been able to identify my exact location based on the topography. But the landscape seemed wrong. The ridges were not quite where they should be. The drainage patterns looked different from the map. I spent an hour trying to correlate my map to the actual terrain. I could not make it work. It was not that the map was inaccurate. It was that the land itself seemed to be in a different configuration than the map represented. It was a strange feeling like the physical world and the cartographic representation were slightly out of sync. At that point, I made the decision to move away from the main trail and to explore deeper into the drainage, toward the area where the injuries had been concentrated. I climbed down to the creek bed and began moving upstream, using the water as a landmark. The creek bed is difficult terrain. The rocks are slippery, the banks are steep, and in places the water is deep and cold. I was making slow progress, and I was becoming increasingly aware that I was isolated. If I injured myself, if I fell, I was far enough from the main trail that help would be difficult to reach. And then I saw something that stopped me. It was hanging from a tree about 50 yards ahead. It looked like a piece of clothing, or maybe not clothing, maybe meat. I could not quite tell from the distance. My first thought was that it was an animal carcass, a kill site for whatever was in that area. My second thought was that it might be evidence of the missing hiker case, that this might be Sarah Chen. I moved toward it carefully, crossing the creek and climbing toward the tree. As I got closer, I could see that it was indeed a piece of fabric. It was gray-white, faded from age or sun exposure. It was hung on a branch about 6 feet up from the ground, and it appeared to have been deliberately placed there rather than caught by chance. When I reached the tree and examined the fabric closely, I could see that it was the remains of what had once been a jacket or coat. The fabric was shredded in places, and there were dark stains on it that could have been blood or could have been mineral deposits or decay. The jacket showed signs of age. The fabric was fragile, disintegrating in places, suggesting it had been hanging there for months or years. There were no bones, no human remains, nothing that definitively suggested this had belonged to Sarah Chen or any specific person. But the deliberate placement of the jacket, the condition of the fabric, the location in the middle of the wilderness, all of it suggested that this was intentional. Someone or something had placed this jacket there. I was examining the fabric, trying to determine if I could identify any distinguishing marks, when I heard a sound from deeper in the forest. It was not loud, it was not immediately threatening, but it was clearly the sound of something moving through the underbrush, moving toward me, and moving with purpose. I turned to look toward the sound. The forest in that direction was dense. The light was filtered through layers of trees, and I could not see clearly more than 20 or 30 feet. I stood still, listening, trying to determine what I was hearing. The sound came again, closer. The movement was deliberate, steady, not the panicked flight of an animal disturbed by my presence, but something that seemed to be moving toward me consciously. And then I made a decision that might have saved my life. I did not wait to see what was coming. I did not try to confront it or investigate further. I turned and started moving back down the creek bed, moving quickly but carefully, trying to keep my footing on the slippery rocks while maintaining speed. I did not hear anything pursuing me. I did not feel like I was being chased. But I did not stop until I had reached the main trail, and I did not stop moving until I had returned to the ranger station. When I arrived at the station, I was shaking. Not from cold or exertion, but from adrenaline and from something I can only describe as existential dread. I had encountered something in that forest. I had not seen it clearly, but I had felt the awareness of something observing me, something that knew I was there, something that was potentially dangerous. I did not report the jacket. I did not mention the expedition to anyone. I filed my normal work log showing that I had conducted routine maintenance checks at the remote stations, and I returned to my normal duties. But something had changed. I had crossed into that area and had confirmed, to my own satisfaction, that there was something there, something that moved deliberately, something that was aware, something that may have been observing me throughout my time in that forest. Over the following weeks, I found myself unable to focus on normal work. I was thinking constantly about what I had experienced, about what I had seen, about the fabric hanging in the tree. I was thinking about the injured people I had interviewed. I was thinking about the pattern of injuries and the way the landscape seemed to operate under different rules in that area. I also started becoming aware of something else. I started noticing that people in the park rangers, staff, frequent visitors seemed to operate with a shared understanding about certain areas. There was a tacit agreement not to discuss the eastern sector in detail. There was a professional distance that rangers maintained when discussing incidents in that area. There was an implicit rule that certain things were not investigated too closely, that certain mysteries were allowed to remain unsolved, that certain boundaries were not crossed. I realized that Daniel, the ranger I had spoken with, was part of this agreement. Jim Kellerman, the chief, was part of it. The injured people I had interviewed were part of it. There was a collective understanding that the park contained areas that operated under different rules, and that the smartest response was to acknowledge those rules implicitly and move on. In April of 2024, I made a decision to step back from active search and rescue coordination. I told Jim that I wanted to move into a different role, something less intense, something that allowed me to maintain regular work hours and not respond to field emergencies. He seemed relieved, though he was careful not to say so. He approved my request for a transfer to administrative coordination work. My new position requires me to manage incident reports and maintain the injury database, but it does not require me to actively respond to emergencies. I spend my days in the office, processing paperwork, updating files, maintaining records. It is not what I want to be doing, but it is what I need to be doing if I want to maintain my mental health and my employment. The injury cases continue. New incidents come in regularly. I document them with the same care I always have. I note the inconsistencies between mechanism and presentation. I track the locations and the patterns, but I do not investigate further. I do not follow up with injured people. I do not try to understand what is happening in that eastern sector. I maintain the injury database with one purpose in mind. Someday, when I am no longer working here, when I have moved on, when there is no risk to my career, I am going to compile all of that data and release it publicly. I am going to present the pattern, the locations, the inconsistencies, the evidence that something in that area is causing systematic injuries to visitors. And I am going to let people decide for themselves what should be done about it. For now, I keep the database current. I add new cases as they come in. I track the patterns, and I wait. The fabric jacket from the creek drainage remains in my personal storage. It is evidence of something. I do not know what. I do not know whose jacket it was. I do not know how long it had been hanging there. But it is physical proof that something unusual exists in that area, and I keep it as a reminder of what I witnessed. I still work at Cascade National Park. One still care about the safety of visitors and the integrity of the park system. But I have learned to separate my responsibility to protect people from my responsibility to maintain institutional loyalty. And increasingly, I believe those two responsibilities are in conflict. There are other people working in this park who know more than I do. There are rangers who have seen things that I have not seen. There are people in administrative roles who are part of the decision to conceal what happens in certain areas. There are researchers and scientists who have documented anomalies but have been pressured into silence. For anyone who is interested in understanding what this park actually is, what the eastern sector contains, and why institutions are so determined to keep it concealed, I maintain a more extensive case file that is available through channel membership. The data is raw, the cases are unfiltered, and the pattern becomes clear when you see the full scope of it. More than 40 injury cases concentrated in a specific geographic area, all showing evidence of precision weapon trauma, all reported by people who have been carefully conditioned to minimize the incident and to avoid further investigation. That is the real story, not mysteries and maybes. Data and pattern. If you hike in national parks, if you venture into remote areas, if you find yourself in terrain that seems wrong, that seems to operate under different rules, that seems to be actively discouraging your presence, listen to that instinct. Do not press forward. Do not investigate. Do not try to prove what you are encountering. Just leave. And if you are injured while hiking, if you suffer a wound that does not match the reported mechanism, if the injury seems too precise or too purposeful, consider whether you should reveal the full truth about what happened. Consider whether your injury might be evidence of something that institutions want to remain hidden. Consider whether your silence might be part of protecting a boundary that should not be crossed. I still process injury reports. I still maintain the database. I still recognize the patterns. And every time I see a new case coming in from the eastern sector, I add it to the file and I remain silent. I still work dispatch for the Cascade National Park Emergency Response System, but I no longer answer calls that come in from locations that should not have cell service. The calls keep coming anyway. Hikers calling for help from places I can verify on GPS do not exist. Missing persons calling to report their own locations. And twice I have answered calls from people who disappeared from the park more than 5 years ago, reporting that they are still hiking, still lost, still trying to find their way out. If you've been following these accounts, please subscribe and share this with someone who works in emergency services or dispatch, and with anyone who uses cell phones in remote areas. If you get a call from someone who should not be able to call you from where they are claiming to be, listen carefully to what they tell you. They might not be calling for the reason you think. My name is Michael Hayes. I have been the primary dispatcher for Cascade National Park Emergency Services for 16 years. Before that, I worked dispatch for Seattle Police Department for 12 years. I transitioned to park emergency response because I wanted work that felt meaningful, work where people's lives actually depended on accurate communication. I have background in emergency medical response, telecommunications systems, radio protocols, and incident management. I know how emergency calls work. I know what information is reliable and what is not. I know the difference between a genuine emergency and a false report. And I know what it sounds like when someone is calling from a location where they should not be able to call from. Cascade National Park is 860 square miles. The area is served by one main dispatch center located in the town of Cascade, Oregon, about 15 miles from the northern park boundary. The dispatch center has 3 full-time operators, including myself. We take calls from park rangers, visitors using cell phones, emergency alert systems at various park facilities, and automated beacons from rescue equipment. We manage approximately 400 emergency calls per year, a mix of injuries, rescues, medical events, and welfare checks. Cell service in the park is spotty. There are dead zones, areas with no coverage at all. There are areas with marginal service where calls might drop or where data transmission is unreliable. And there are areas with relatively good coverage, typically the main corridor trails and the higher elevation ridges where signal can bounce off the landscape. I have a detailed map of the service areas. I know where calls should be coming from and where they should not. The first call that made me aware of something wrong came in October of 2022. A woman called reporting that she was injured and lost on the Eastern Loop trails. She gave her name as Sarah Chen. She reported that she had been hiking for several hours and had become disoriented. She reported a possible fracture to her ankle. She reported that she could see the ridgeline to the east and that she was somewhere in the Limestone Creek drainage. I followed protocol. I asked for her exact location, her phone GPS coordinates, her description of the terrain, her cell signal strength. She provided coordinates that placed her in the Limestone Creek area, which matched her description. I told her to remain in place, to mark her location with bright clothing or equipment, and that a rescue team would be dispatched. But before I could complete the call, something happened. The connection degraded suddenly. The call dropped. I tried to call back, using the callback feature for the originating number, but the number would not connect. I attempted to triangulate her position using the coordinates she had provided, but the park's location data system showed no active signal from her phone at those coordinates. I reported the incident to Jim Kellerman and initiated a rescue response based on the information Sarah Chen had provided. The rescue team deployed to the Limestone Creek area. They searched for several days. They found Sarah Chen's car at the north parking lot. They found her emergency whistle on the trail, but they did not find her. What I learned later was that Sarah Chen had filed a hiking permit for a 3-day loop that started at the north entrance. She was reported missing on the 4th day. A full search and rescue operation was initiated. The search lasted 9 days. Sarah Chen was never found. I did not initially connect my dispatch call to the missing person case. The call had come in at a specific time. The missing person report came in days later. It seemed like separate events. But then, about 3 weeks after the search was suspended, I received another call. This call came in at 2:47 a.m. The caller was a man and he was panicked. He reported that he was lost in the forest, that it was dark, that he had been hiking for hours and could not find the trail. He reported that his phone battery was low. He said his name was Marcus Holloway. I had access to all missing person reports filed with the park. I knew that Marcus Holloway had gone missing on a backcountry trail in August of 2019. His body was never found. He was officially presumed deceased. And yet, this person was calling me in the middle of the night, claiming to be lost, claiming to be hiking, reporting current conditions. I asked him for his location. He gave me coordinates. I looked at those coordinates on my system. They placed him in an area of the park with no cell service, dead zone, a place where no call could originate. I asked him to repeat the coordinates. He did, and they were the same. I told him that according to my mapping system, there was no cell service in that location and that his call should not be connecting. There was a long pause on the line. Then he said, I don't know how I'm calling you either, but I'm here, and I'm lost, and my phone is dying. The call dropped before I could respond. I filed a report on the call. I documented the time, the phone number, the coordinates, the conversation. I presented it to my supervisor. I told her that I had received a call from someone reporting to be Marcus Holloway, a missing person from 2019, calling from a location with no cell service. My supervisor looked at the report, then at me, and asked if I was certain the coordinates were correct. I showed her the documentation. She said she would look into it, and then she filed the report away. No search was initiated, no follow-up was conducted. The call was logged and forgotten, but I did not forget it. I began paying close attention to the calls that came through our system. I began tracking calls from impossible locations, places where cell service did not exist. I began cross-referencing callers' names with the missing person database, and I started to find patterns. Over the next 18 months, I received and documented 7 more calls from locations with no cellular coverage. 3 of those calls came from missing persons, people who had disappeared from the park years earlier. 1 call came from a dead person, a man who had died in a hiking accident in 2015 and whose body had been recovered and identified. He called to report that he was injured and needed rescue. Each call had the same quality. The callers sounded afraid. They reported being lost. They reported that they had been hiking for a very long time, far longer than they should have been hiking. They reported that they could not find the trail, that the terrain did not match their maps, that they seemed to be moving in directions they did not intend. And when I would tell them that their call was originating from a location with no cell service, they would express confusion or alarm. They would not seem to understand how their call was connecting. Some of them would become more desperate, asking me for help, asking me to understand that they were really there, that they really needed rescue. Then the calls would drop. I never received follow-up calls from any of these people. I initiated rescue responses based on the information they provided, but no searchers ever found them. The locations they reported did not correspond to any actual missing persons reports. except in the cases where they were calling in as people who had already gone missing years earlier. I was starting to understand that something was wrong with my understanding of how the dispatch system worked. Either the technology was malfunctioning in ways I did not recognize, or the calls were genuine and the locations were real, and those locations existed in places where they should not be able to exist. I started researching the history of calls at Cascade Dispatch. I requested records going back 10 years. I looked for patterns of calls from impossible locations, calls that did not match with rescue reports, calls from people who should not be able to make calls. What I found was startling. There were dozens of such calls scattered throughout the records. Some had been documented, most had not. Some had resulted in rescue responses. Most had simply been filed away and forgotten. The pattern went back at least to 2009. Before that, records were incomplete, but there was no indication that these kinds of calls were a new phenomenon. I also looked at the phone numbers. The calls were coming from various numbers, but many of them came from phones that had been reported stolen, lost, or were registered to people who were deceased. Some came from numbers that did not correspond to any registered phone at all, numbers that should not have existed in our system. And I started noticing something else. The calls were concentrated in a specific geographic area, not in terms of where the callers claimed to be, but in terms of where they were calling about. Most of the impossible calls involved people reporting being lost in the eastern sector of the park, the Limestone Creek drainage, the high ridges, the area around Station 47. I brought this analysis to my supervisor again. I told her that I had identified a pattern of impossible calls spanning at least 10 years, all concentrated in the same geographic area, all involving people who reported being lost or injured in locations with no cell service. I told her that I believed something systematic was happening, something that required investigation. My supervisor listened, she thanked me for my thorough analysis, and then she told me that I was not to investigate this further. She said that the calls were anomalies in the system, possibly related to telecommunications infrastructure, possibly related to equipment malfunction or interference. She said that pursuing this investigation would create unnecessary alarm among park visitors and staff. She said that if I had evidence of a specific crime or a specific hazard, I should report it through proper channels, but that what I had was speculation and pattern matching, not evidence. She also suggested, gently, that I might be experiencing some occupational stress, that I had been working dispatch for a long time, and that it might be good for me to consider taking some time off, perhaps speaking with a counselor. I was not experiencing occupational stress, but I understood what she was communicating. I understood that there was an institutional awareness of these calls, that it had been decided that these calls would not be investigated, and that my continued pursuit of the matter would be viewed as problematic. So I stopped investigating officially, but I did not stop paying attention. Over the following year, I continued to receive calls from impossible locations. I documented them meticulously. I kept a personal log separate from the official system. I tracked phone numbers, times, locations, content. I was building a private database of evidence that something was communicating through the emergency dispatch system, something or someone who should not be able to communicate, who was calling from places that did not have coverage, who was reporting experiences that did not match normal wilderness emergencies. And then something changed. The calls became more frequent. In 2023, I received 18 calls from impossible locations. In 2024, I received 32. The calls were escalating, and they were becoming more specific. In January of 2024, I received a call at 1:15 a.m. from someone claiming to be Jennifer Morse, a woman who had been injured on the Eastern Loop trails in June of 2022. According to my records, Jennifer had been treated for a laceration to her leg, had recovered without complications, and had returned to Seattle. Yet she was calling me now, at 1 in the morning, claiming to be lost, claiming to be in pain, claiming to be on the Eastern Loop trails. I asked her how she had called me from a number that showed no registered owner. She said she did not know. She said she had found a phone lying on the trail, face down in the dirt. She said the screen was cracked, but the phone turned on when she picked it up. She said she managed to unlock it using facial recognition, and the first thing she did was call for help. I asked her to describe her exact location. She described landmarks that placed her on the Eastern Loop, in an area that should not have cell service. I told her this. She expressed surprise. She said that if she had no cell service, how were we having this conversation? It was a good question. I did not have an answer. I told Jennifer to stay on the line, that I was initiating a rescue response, that help was coming. I dispatched a rescue team to the coordinates she provided. I asked her to describe her injuries. She said she had a deep laceration to her leg, that it was bleeding, that she was in significant pain. This was consistent with the injury she had suffered in June 2022, more than a year earlier. I asked her if she remembered being rescued before, if she remembered being treated for the same injury. She said no, she had no memory of that. She said she remembered hiking, and she remembered falling, and she remembered the sharp pain of the cut, but everything after that was confused. She said she had been trying to get out of the forest since the injury. She said she had been hiking for what felt like weeks. She said she did not understand why it was taking so long to reach the trail. I kept her on the line while the rescue team moved toward the coordinates she had provided. I was monitoring their position on my screen. They were moving into the area, they were approaching her reported location, and then their GPS positioning became erratic. The signal was jumping, moving in ways that did not correspond to actual movement on the ground. The team leader reported that the GPS was malfunctioning. I told them to proceed on compass bearing toward the coordinates, to move forward until they encountered Jennifer or evidence of her presence. They continued for approximately 45 minutes. Jennifer remained on the line with me during this time, and her reports of her situation did not change. She was still injured, still in pain, still lost. The terrain around her had not changed. She still could not see the main trail. Then the rescue team reported that they had reached the coordinates Jennifer had provided, but there was nothing there. No person, no injury, no sign of recent activity. The area was undisturbed forest, no evidence of a hiker, no evidence of distress, no equipment, no blood, nothing. I told Jennifer that the rescue team had reached her location and found nothing. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "That is not possible. I am here. I am right here." I told her that the rescue team was looking for her, and they would find her. But Jennifer's voice changed then. She sounded afraid. She said, "They are not looking in the right place. They are looking there, but I am here. These are not the same place." The call dropped immediately after. I kept the rescue team in the area for another hour, searching, calling out, looking for any sign of activity. They found nothing. I called Jennifer back multiple times, but the number would not connect. When the rescue team returned to the ranger station, the team leader, a ranger named David Corwin, came to speak with me directly. He asked me to replay the call. He listened to the entire conversation. When it was finished, he asked me what I thought was happening. I told him honestly that I did not. The first time the woods moved, I was looking directly at them. I don't mean the branches shifted in the wind or fog changed the shape of a ridgeline. I mean a corridor between two rows of hardwoods closed while I watched it. 1 second, I could see our orange equipment case sitting beside a survey point 70 yards downhill. Then 3 mature trees occupied the gap. Their trunks were thick, rooted, and covered in moss. When I walked around them, the equipment case was still there, but the aluminum tag we had attached to the nearest tree was buried beneath 23 years of growth. The tag had my name stamped on it. It also carried a date, 11 days in the future. If unsettling wilderness accounts are the reason you keep listening after everyone else has gone to sleep, leave a like, subscribe, and share this with someone who thinks getting lost is only a matter of poor navigation. What happened to us had nothing to do with navigation. I've changed the names of 2 people and the number assigned to the property. The terrain, the measurements, and the sequence of events are exactly as I recorded them. My name is Nathan Ward. I am 39 now, and for most of my adult life I worked in forestry and boundary surveying throughout West Virginia, Western Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, and parts of Pennsylvania. I wasn't a licensed land surveyor, but I worked under one for 14 years. My job was to locate old monumentation, clear lines of sight, run equipment, document witness trees, compare modern coordinates with deed calls, and identify discrepancies before the licensed surveyor signed anything. A lot of boundary work in the Appalachian Mountains is less precise than people imagine. You can have a deed written in 1912 that describes a line as running from a white oak near a spring, 400 poles, toward a chestnut snag, then following the ridge to a pile of stones. The white oak is gone. The spring has shifted. The chestnut disappeared before your grandfather was born, and every pile of stones in the county looks intentional if you stare at it long enough. You learn to build certainty from several weak pieces of evidence. A rusted iron pin might match the distance, but not the bearing. A fence line might agree with local occupation, but contradict the deed. A tree can contain an old axe blaze that places it within 10 feet of a historic corner. A neighboring owner may remember where his father told him not to cut. None of those things proves a boundary alone. Together, they can establish a reasonable position. I was good at that kind of work because I didn't need every question answered immediately. I could hold several possibilities in my head without forcing one of them to be true. That habit kept us alive. It also kept us in the woods longer than we should have stayed. The property was a privately owned tract in eastern West Virginia. A little over 6,000 acres of hardwood timber, steep drainage, old mining disturbance, and abandoned farm clearings. I'll call it the Blackwater Fork Tract, although that wasn't its legal name. It bordered state-managed forest on 2 sides and several smaller private parcels on the others. A timber investment company had purchased it from a family trust. Before approving selective harvesting, the company wanted the exterior boundary retraced and several interior management units mapped. Most of the deed descriptions had been copied from documents written between 1896 and 1949. Some referred to roads that no longer existed. Others followed streams that had changed course. The project was expected to take 3 weeks. Our crew consisted of 3 people. I ran the field operation. Maya Rios handled the GNSS receiver, data collector, and mapping. She was 27, sharp, patient, and better with modern positioning equipment than anyone I had worked with. She had grown up near Baltimore and had been doing mountain work for only 2 years, but she compensated for limited local experience by preparing harder than everyone else. The third member was Emmett Pike, a 61-year-old timber cruiser who had worked in those counties since the late 1970s. Emmett knew how to judge distance on a slope, find an abandoned road beneath a century of leaf litter, and tell whether a tree had grown around wire even when no metal remained visible. He had a bad right knee, an old green pickup, and a habit of treating every new piece of technology as a temporary inconvenience. Our supervisor was a licensed surveyor named Daniel Kerr. Daniel stayed in the office most days, reviewed our data each evening, and visited the tract when we found monuments requiring professional judgment. He trusted me with field decisions, which mattered because Blackwater Fork had no dependable cellular service. We carried handheld radios, a satellite messenger, paper maps, spare batteries, first aid supplies, and enough food to remain overnight if a vehicle became trapped. I was also carrying more personal pressure than I admitted. My former wife and I had a 12-year-old daughter named Caroline. I had missed 2 of Caroline's school events that spring because of emergency fieldwork. The Blackwater project included a completion bonus large enough to cover the remaining medical bills from my father's final year, and I had convinced myself that finishing quickly would make up for being absent. Caroline had stopped arguing when I told her I had to work. That was worse than anger. Before leaving, I promised I would be home for her Saturday science competition. She had built a simple demonstration showing how water moves through different layers of soil. The last thing she said to me that Monday morning was, "You always know which way water goes. You better not get lost." I told her professionals didn't get lost. For the first 2 days nothing happened that couldn't be explained by ordinary conditions. We entered through an old timber road on the western boundary, parked beside a locked access gate, and hiked north with our equipment. The spring had been unusually wet. The ground remained soft beneath the leaves, and several drainage crossings required care. Fog settled into the lower hollows each morning, but usually burned away before noon. Our primary objective was to recover a corner mentioned in a 1949 retracement. The record described a sandstone monument at the intersection of 3 ownership lines, witnessed by 2 sugar maples and a black birch. From that corner we planned to work clockwise around the tract. Maya established our first control point in a gravel opening near the gate. We set a second point on a ridge where satellite reception was clear, then began extending positions into the timber using a combination of GNSS observations, total station measurements, compass bearings, and taped distances. For anyone unfamiliar with surveying, a total station is an instrument that measures angles and distances. One person operates it from a known point. Another person carries a pole with a reflective prism. The instrument shoots a beam toward the prism and calculates its location. In open terrain, the process is straightforward. In Appalachian timber, every measurement is a negotiation with the landscape. Rhododendron blocks visibility. Steep slopes distort your sense of horizontal distance. Trees prevent long shots. You may move the instrument 6 times to advance half a mile. We marked temporary points with wooden stakes, flagging, and numbered aluminum tags. Our company tags were oval, about 2 inches long, with a blank center for stamped information. I carried a steel hand stamp set in a yellow case. Maya usually entered the point number into the data collector while I stamped the physical tag. That detail matters. The letters on those tags weren't printed by a machine. Each character was struck individually with a hammer. My spacing was inconsistent, and I tended to hit the first digit harder than the others. On our first afternoon, we found the remains of an old fence running northeast through the tract. Most of the wire had rusted away, but several trees contained dark seams where they had grown around it. The fence wasn't shown on our current maps, though it agreed roughly with the line described in an old timber sale. Emmett crouched beside one of the trees and pressed his thumb against the bark. "This line's older than the road," he said. Maya checked the map. "It doesn't connect to anything, doesn't now. Where did it go?" Emmett looked downhill toward a thick stand of red spruce and hemlock. People used to build fences for reasons that stopped mattering. We followed the remnants for 300 yards before it turned away from the boundary we needed. Near the turn, I noticed 3 strips of faded blue plastic flagging tied to a beech sapling. Blue wasn't one of our colors. Survey crews use different colors for different purposes, but there is no universal system. Blue might mark water, a center line, a proposed road, or simply a route used by another crew. The flagging looked old enough to have lost most of its color. I untied one strip and examined it. The exposed side was brittle and pale. The part protected beneath the knot remained dark blue. Nothing unusual about that. What bothered me was the knot. It was a doubled slip knot, tied in the same style I used. Most people wrap flagging twice and pull it tight. I left a small loop so it could be removed without cutting. Maya saw me studying it. "Somebody copy your patented knot, apparently. Should we report it?" "No, it's old flagging." I put it in my vest pocket and forgot about it for several hours. The next morning, we reached the approximate location of the 1949 corner. The coordinates from the record placed it on a shoulder between 2 drainages. We searched 100-foot radius and found no sandstone monument. That wasn't surprising. Stones get moved by logging, erosion, frost, or people who don't realize they are important. We did find one of the witness trees. The sugar maple had long since fallen and decayed, but its stump remained. A section of healed scar tissue indicated an old blaze on the side facing the supposed corner. By measuring from the stump using the record distance, we narrowed the search area. Emmett located the monument beneath 6 inches of soil. It was a rectangular sandstone block, roughly 20 inches long, set vertically. Its upper face carried a hand-cut cross. One arm of the cross pointed almost exactly along the deed line. "That's clean," Maya said. It was. Cleaner than most old corners. We photographed the monument, recorded its dimensions, and began setting the instrument. While Maya established the GNSS position, I searched for the second witness tree. The 1949 description placed a black birch 18 feet southeast of the monument. The original tree was gone, but I found a large hemlock near the expected position. A narrow vertical seam ran through its bark. I used my hatchet to remove loose outer material. Beneath it, the tree had grown around a corroded square nail. Old surveyors often attached metal tags to witness trees, though the original record didn't mention one. I widened the opening carefully. A piece of aluminum appeared behind the bark. The tag was oval. I assumed another crew had retraced the line more recently. Aluminum tags remain readable for decades when protected by tree growth, and finding undocumented retracement evidence is common. I used pliers to work the tag loose. The front carried 4 stamped lines, BWF-17, PNT 204, N. Ward, May 26. For several seconds, I thought my eyes were combining familiar shapes into words that weren't there. Then Maya stepped beside me. "What does that say?" I handed it to her. She read it once, then again. BWF was our internal abbreviation for Blackwater Fork. Point 204 matched the number assigned to the monument in Maya's data collector. N. Ward was my name. The date was May 26th. It was May 15th. Maya turned the tag over. The reverse side was dark with oxidation, except for a narrow bright line where the tree had pressed against it. "You put this here?" "No. Could Daniel have come out before us?" "He didn't know what number we would assign the point. Point numbers weren't predetermined. Maya's software incremented them as we stored data. If she had deleted a test observation that morning, the monument might have become point 203 or 205. Emmett took the tag and squinted at the lettering. "This yours? It looks like mine." The N was deeper on the left side. The first digit in 204 had been struck harder. The spacing between N and Ward was wider than it should have been. Those were my habits. Emmett examined the scar in the hemlock. "How deep was it?" "About 3 inches. Then, it's been inside that tree a while." Tree growth varies, but a tag buried beneath 3 inches of wood doesn't get there in days or months. Daniel later estimated the scar had closed more than 20 years earlier. Maya suggested the most reasonable explanation. "Maybe the point number and initials are a coincidence. The tract might have been surveyed by another N. Ward. BWF could have referred to something else. May 26th might have belonged to a different year, since the tag showed no year." I wanted to believe that. Then I compared it with a blank tag from my vest. Same shape, same dimensions, same manufacturer's notch along the upper edge. Our company had ordered that design 8 months earlier. I called Daniel on the satellite phone. The connection was poor, but I described what we had found. He was silent for a few seconds. "Bring it in tonight. We're 800 yards from the trucks. We can keep working, Nathan. Bring it in." "Do you know another Ward who worked this county?" "No." "What about the tags? Our batch is custom cut. Could an older batch look identical, not with that notch?" He told us to preserve the tag in a sample bag, photograph the scar, and stop disturbing the tree. He didn't order us off the tract. At the time, none of us believed we were in danger. We thought we had found evidence of trespassing, fraud, or an unusual prank. I put the tag in a clear plastic bag and sealed it. Before leaving, Maya asked me to stand beside the monument with the prism pole so she could verify one final measurement. I walked 30 yards uphill to the position she indicated. "Left 6 inches," she called. I shifted. Back toward me, I moved downhill. "Hold." The total station emitted its measurement tone. At the same moment, the radio on my shoulder clicked. My own voice came through the speaker. "Left 6 inches." Maya lowered the instrument. We looked at each other. The radio clicked again. My voice said, "Back toward me." The signal was weak, full of static, but the words were clear. Then came the electronic tone from the total station. It was a recording of what had happened less than 10 seconds earlier. Maya reached for her radio. "Did you transmit?" "No, neither did I." Emmett was 50 yards away searching the ridge. He carried the third radio, but when we called him, he answered from a different channel. Our radios could scan multiple frequencies, and accidental cross-channel reception happens. Construction crews, hunters, emergency personnel, and other surveyors all use similar equipment. It was possible another radio had received our voices and rebroadcast them through a repeater. The problem was that I had not spoken the instructions. Maya had. The transmission used my voice to repeat her words. We packed our equipment and returned to the trucks. The route back should have taken 40 minutes. It took nearly 2 hours. We began by following our flagging west toward the gravel opening. The first several markers appeared where expected. Then we reached a narrow drainage that none of us remembered crossing. It wasn't large. A shallow stream ran between moss-covered banks, no more than 4 feet wide. The bed contained angular sandstone and fresh leaves. A fallen poplar created an easy bridge. Maya checked the track on her data collector. "Our line is on the other side." Emmett shook his head. "We didn't cross water coming in. There are 3 drainages between here and the road. Not this one. I checked my paper map. The contour lines suggested a minor seasonal channel, but the mapped drainage should have been 200 yards south. We crossed. 100 yards farther we encountered the same stream again. This time, the fallen poplar lay upstream rather than downstream. Maya studied the data collector. We curved north. We've been following our flagging, I said. Blue ribbons hung ahead of us. We had used orange. The blue markers were tied at eye level every 30 to 40 feet. Each knot contained a small removable loop I preferred. I removed the strip I had collected the previous day from my pocket and compared it with the nearest marker. Same color, same width, same weathering. The difference was that the nearest ribbon moved freely in the breeze. It hadn't been there long enough for the knot to tighten around the branch. We follow the compass, I said. Due west until we hit the old road. Maya put away the data collector. Emmett led with his handheld compass, while I checked our back bearing. The slope descended gradually, which agreed with the terrain near the road. After 15 minutes, we found one of our orange markers, then another. A sense of relief lasted until we reached the sandstone monument. We had traveled west from the monument for almost half a mile. Now we were standing beside it again. Our equipment impressions remained in the soil. The hemlock scar was still exposed. The witness tree tag was safe in my vest. Maya looked at the compass. The needle pointed west. Emmett held his compass beside hers. His pointed east. We moved several feet apart. The disagreement remained nearly 180 degrees. Magnetic interference can affect a compass. Buried metal, iron-rich rock, vehicles, radios, and equipment all create errors. 2 compasses pointing in opposite directions is extreme, but not impossible if one has been damaged. I used the sun. It was after 4 o'clock. The brightest part of the sky showed through the trees to our right. Based on the slope and time of day, west should have been slightly behind us. That was where we had come from. Maya tried the satellite messenger. It displayed our position within 15 feet of the monument but failed to send a message. I took out the blue flagging from my pocket. It was no longer brittle. The material felt flexible and new. The faded surface had regained most of its color. I tore it in half to see whether sunlight had created an illusion. The inside was bright blue. "Leave it," Emmett said. I looked at him. His expression had changed. Emmett rarely appeared frightened, frustrated, irritated, tired. Yes, fear showed differently. His mouth became very still. Why? Because it wasn't ours to carry. Whose was it? He looked toward the hemlock. When I was 17, my uncle brought me into a tract somewhere around here. Not this exact ridge. I don't think it was. He was cruising timber for a paper company. We found blue line marking tied in knots he used. Did you get lost? For half a day. What happened? We quit following marks. That's what we did. No, we quit following anything that looked placed. He picked a direction by examining the downhill flow of the terrain. Streams in that section eventually reached the western fork, which paralleled the road. He told us to ignore the compasses, GPS flagging, and visible trails. Water only lies when people move it, he said. Caroline's science project came to mind. Water flows downhill. Even when a map is wrong or a compass fails, gravity remains consistent. We descended into the drainage and followed the stream bed. The walking was slower, but the water grew steadily deeper. That indicated we were moving downstream. Within 30 minutes, we reached the old timber road. Our trucks were parked approximately 200 yards north. Both driver's side doors were open. Nothing had been stolen. The keys remained in my console. Our food, fuel, and spare equipment were untouched. A line of wet boot prints began behind Emmett's truck and continued toward the woods. They matched my boots. I checked the tread against one print. Same manufacturer, same size, and the same triangular chunk missing from the right heel. The tracks didn't come out of the woods. They began at the truck. From there they went east, toward the monument. Maya crouched beside them. "You walked this way this morning." The ground was dry then. The prints contained fresh water. Small droplets still clung to the surrounding leaves. Emmett closed both truck doors. "Get in," he said. We drove out without collecting the control equipment we had left on the ridge. At the office, Daniel examined the tag under magnification. He compared it with the blank stock in our supply cabinet and confirmed it came from the same custom batch. The cut edges, notch, alloy thickness, and protective coating were identical. We then tested my stamp set. I stamped N. Ward and PNT 204 onto a blank tag. When the two were placed together, the letters aligned almost perfectly. The uneven N, the deep first digit, and the spacing matched. Daniel asked whether I had stamped the tag earlier and forgotten. No. Could someone have taken your stamps? They stay in my field case. Was the case ever unattended? Of course. It was in my truck. It was at the motel, so somebody could have accessed it. That became our working explanation. Someone had entered my truck, copied our supplies, discovered the point numbering sequence, and installed the tag in advance. The tree scar had either been artificially created or we had misjudged its age. The radio transmission could have been produced by the same person using a voice recording. The blue flagging and misleading route were part of the prank. It required extensive preparation and knowledge of our movements. But human interference remained more believable than the alternative. We reported the boot prints and open vehicles to the county sheriff's office. A deputy took photographs and checked the trucks for damage. He found none. No usable fingerprints were recovered from the handles because all three of us had touched them repeatedly. That evening, Daniel downloaded Maya's survey data. Several points were corrupted. The coordinates for the sandstone monument appeared correctly in the raw observation file. Beneath them were 7 additional measurements, recorded at 11-minute intervals after we had packed the total station. Each measurement occupied the same point number. Each placed the monument farther east. The first shift was 9 feet. The second was 37. The final observation located it nearly half a mile from its original position. The instrument log showed no operator name and no prism target. It had measured the monument as if the monument itself were moving through the woods. Daniel thought the data collector's clock had failed. Maya connected the equipment to diagnostic software and ran a full check. No errors appeared. The final measurement time was 5:12 p.m. At 5:12, we had been following the stream toward the trucks. That evening, Daniel ordered the crew to stay out of the tract until the property company decided how to respond. I called Caroline and told her I might be home earlier than expected. She asked whether I had found anything interesting. I almost mentioned the tag. Instead, I told her we had found an old boundary stone. "Does it tell you where the property ends?" she asked. "It's supposed to. What if it's in the wrong place? Then we use everything around it." She considered that. What if everything around it is wrong too? Children sometimes ask questions adults have trained themselves to avoid. I told her that couldn't happen. The next morning, the timber company's regional manager called Daniel. Harvest planning had already been delayed twice. They wanted the boundary completed. Unless we could provide evidence of a genuine safety threat, they expected work to resume. Trespassing and possible equipment tampering qualified as concerns, but the company argued that a larger crew and law enforcement notification would reduce the risk. Daniel proposed sending a different team. The client refused to pay for remobilization. I should have declined. I had enough experience to recognize when financial pressure was overriding judgment. Instead, I thought of the completion bonus, my promise to Caroline, and the possibility that someone was deliberately trying to frighten us away from valuable timber. I agreed to return. Maya did too. She didn't like unsolved technical problems, and she believed the corrupted data had a rational cause. Emmett initially refused. Daniel offered to replace him. Emmett stared at the project map for a long time. "No," he said. "If they're going back, I'm going." We returned with additional precautions. The sheriff's office increased patrols near the access road. Daniel joined us in the field. We carried 2 independent GNSS receivers, 4 compasses, trail cameras, tamper seals, a drone, and a second satellite communicator. Daniel also brought a licensed handgun, though he kept it holstered and never treated it as a solution. We changed our flagging color from orange to fluorescent pink. Each ribbon received a number written in permanent marker. We photographed every temporary point and recorded the time. Our plan was simple: recover the equipment left near the sandstone monument, establish whether the tree scar had been altered, install cameras, and withdraw before evening. The trip from the road to the monument took 43 minutes. We crossed no stream. The corridor remained exactly where our original route indicated. Our orange flagging still hung along the line. We found no blue ribbons. At the hemlock, Daniel measured the scar and extracted a small core sample from the edge. Counting tree rings is difficult near an injury because growth becomes distorted, but he identified at least 19 annual layers covering the space where the tag had rested. That meant the tree had begun growing over the tag around the time I graduated high school. The trail cameras were mounted facing the monument. the hemlock, and the approach route. Each housing received a numbered seal. Maya verified their timestamps against the satellite receiver. We found the total station inside its orange case where we had left it. The case was closed and latched. A pink ribbon had been tied around the handle. Written on it in black marker was the number 17. We had not yet used any pink flagging. The marker handwriting was Maya's. Daniel removed the ribbon with gloves and placed it in an evidence bag. Maya stared at the number. 17 is my next flag, she said. She opened her vest and counted the prepared ribbons in her pocket. We had numbered them at the office before leaving. 16 was on top. 17 remained beneath it. She pulled it out. We now had 2 identical ribbons carrying the number 17. The handwriting matched down to a slight hook she placed at the top of the 7. Daniel stopped trying to explain each discovery individually. We retrieve everything, he said. No more points. No more searching. A radio clicked behind us. Not one of the radios we carried. The sound came from somewhere downhill, followed by 3 short bursts of static. Then Daniel's voice said, "We retrieve everything." A pause. No more points. Another pause. No more searching. The words were repeated with the exact pacing he had used, but the last sentence came from farther north than the first. Emmett turned slowly, listening. "It's setting stations," he said. Daniel looked at him. "What?" The sound moved 3 times. Echo. Echoes don't stop and start in different places. The transmission repeated. This time, the sentences came in reverse order. No more searching. No more points. We retrieve everything. The final sentence sounded less than 20 yards away. Daniel drew his handgun but kept it pointed toward the ground. No one was visible between the trees. We packed quickly. Maya folded the tripod. I loaded the total station into its case. Daniel removed the trail camera memory cards, but left the cameras mounted to preserve the scene. Emmett stood beside the sandstone monument, looking at the ground. "What is it?" I asked. He pointed toward a patch of flattened leaves 10 feet east of the stone. A circular depression marked the soil. It was about the width of a person's stance. 2 shallow impressions sat side by side, as though someone had stood there for a long time. There were no tracks leading to or from it. Another pair appeared 20 feet farther east. Then another. The positions formed a straight line through the timber. Daniel photographed them. Maya opened the map. "That's the bearing from the corrupted measurements." The false observations from our total station had placed the monument progressively east. The standing impressions occupied those calculated positions. A measurement requires an instrument and a target. Someone or something had occupied each false location long enough to compress the soil, but had crossed the spaces between them without leaving tracks. The easternmost station lay beyond our view. From that direction came the electronic measurement tone of the total station inside my case. The instrument had no battery installed. We left. For the first half-mile, the return route remained normal. We followed numbered pink flagging toward the ridge control point. Daniel walked first, checking each marker against the photographs. At flag 11, the terrain changed. The ribbon should have been tied to a young maple beside a rock ledge. The maple and ribbon were present, but the ledge was gone. In its place stood 3 mature trees. They were a red oak, a hickory, and a white pine. Each trunk exceeded 18 inches in diameter. Their root flares broke through the soil. Moss coated the northern sides. A rotten log rested between them. Trees that size could not have been planted or moved. Daniel compared the photograph on his phone. The image clearly showed the rock ledge. Behind it, the forest floor remained open. Maya walked 10 yards left, trying to see around the trunks. "There's the control case." Through the gap, I saw our orange equipment case on the downhill slope. It should have been visible directly from flag 11. The trees blocked the route, but not the destination. Daniel used a folding saw to cut a shallow notch in the outer bark of the red oak. He wanted physical proof if the terrain appeared different later. The exposed wood was pale and wet. Beneath the first growth layer lay an aluminum tag. He cut around it carefully. The tag read, BWF-17, PNT 311, D. Kerr, May 29. Point 311 had not been created. Daniel had not used my stamp set. May 29th was 2 weeks away. The tag rested beneath more than 20 growth rings. As Daniel freed it, the total station emitted another measurement tone from inside my case. The corridor behind us closed. I watched the gap between the maple and a large beech narrow as two trunks shifted into alignment. I didn't see roots pulling from the soil. I didn't see branches moving. The trees were simply positioned differently between one blink and the next. Our pink ribbons now continued downhill instead of west. Flag 12 hung from a branch 50 yards below us. Daniel checked his photographs. That isn't where I placed it. Emmett pulled the ribbon free. The number had changed. It was no longer 12. It read 18. Maya checked her pocket. Ribbon 18 was missing. We're leaving marks before we place them, she said. No, Emmett replied. It's showing us where we're going to place them. We aren't placing anything else. The unseen radio clicked. Maya's voice came through. We aren't placing anything else. The transmission came from downhill, near flag 18. Then we heard her voice again, farther away. Put it on the hemlock. Maya hadn't said that. She took one step backward. The voice continued, calm and practical. Higher, where Nathan can see it. It was not calling us by name to lure us through the trees. It was rehearsing instructions Maya had not yet given. That distinction frightened me more. A mimic repeats what it hears. This was repeating what it expected. We stopped following the ribbons. Emmett chose a downhill route based on water flow, as he had before. The slope carried us into a narrow drainage. Within minutes we reached running water. We followed it west. The stream curved north, then east, then south. Mountain drainages can bend, but water continued moving downhill. The channel should eventually lead out of the interior. After 20 minutes, we passed a split birch with a pink ribbon tied around it. The number was 19. Maya still had ribbon 19 in her pocket. She removed it and held both strips together. The writing was identical. We haven't been here, Daniel said. Emmett looked at the water. It says, we will. We continued downstream. The channel widened, but the volume of water decreased. Tributaries should increase flow. Instead, the stream became shallower with each bend. 5 minutes later, the water stopped. It didn't sink into gravel or spread into a marsh. The stream ended at the base of a standing white oak. Water flowed downhill toward the trunk, entered a dark line beneath the roots, and disappeared. On the opposite side of the tree, the ground was dry. Daniel circled the oak. Sinkhole. This isn't limestone, I said. The surrounding geology was sandstone and shale. Small underground channels can occur, but the water vanished too cleanly. The total station case vibrated in my hand. A measurement tone sounded inside it. Then another. Then a third. Maya opened the case. The battery compartment was empty. The power switch was off. The instrument's display lit anyway. A coordinate appeared. Daniel read it aloud. That's the sandstone monument. A second coordinate replaced it, 9 feet east, then 37 feet. The sequence matched the corrupted observations. The instrument advanced through each false location until it reached the final point nearly half a mile away. Then the numbers changed. A new point appeared, PNT 311. The screen displayed the coordinate of the red oak where Daniel's tag had been buried. Another point appeared, PNT 312. Its position was 20 feet downhill from where we stood. The instrument rotated within the case. The housing pressed against the foam as the telescope attempted to aim through the closed lid. Maya dropped the case. The tone sounded. Behind us, leaves compressed beneath an invisible weight. 2 shallow boot-shaped impressions formed beside the stream. Point 312. A second pair appeared downhill. Point 313. The instrument tone repeated. The forest was extending a traverse. In surveying, a traverse is a series of connected lines between measured points. You occupy one station, sight another, move forward, and continue. When possible, you close the traverse by returning to a known location. The difference between where your measurements place the final point and where it actually exists is called closure error. A perfect closure is nearly impossible. Every real measurement contains some error. The woods were building a traverse without error. Each impossible observation created a physical station. Each station led farther into the tract. The future tags identified people who had operated or supervised the work. It wasn't predicting random events. It was assigning us positions. That's what my uncle found, Emmett said. Not voices, lines. He finally told us the full story. In 1981, he and his uncle had entered a timber tract after another crew reported finding fresh paint on trees they hadn't marked. The paint formed a continuous route through an area scheduled for cruising the following week. When Emmett's uncle followed it, he found numbered sample plots matching the order he had planned to use. At the last plot, they heard their own axes striking trees farther ahead. They abandoned their equipment and followed a stream out. Emmett's uncle never worked that district again. Before he died, he told Emmett that some parts of the mountains didn't hide people. They finished their route for them, he had said. Daniel listened without interrupting. When Emmett finished, Daniel asked, "Why didn't you tell us before?" "Because it sounded foolish for 45 years. The instrument tone sounded again. Point 314 appeared in the leaves. Closer. The new impressions didn't wait downhill. They formed beside Maya. She moved away. The footprints remained empty, but the ground inside them darkened, as if pressed by soaked boots. The display changed to PNT 315. Beside the point number appeared a name, M. Rios. "Turn it off," Daniel said. "It is off," Maya replied. "Break it." I removed the instrument from the case, placed it on a flat stone, and struck the display with the back of my hatchet. The glass shattered. The screen went dark. The tone stopped. For several seconds, only the water beneath the oak roots made any sound. Then a total station measurement tone answered from the forest. Another answered from the opposite slope. A third sounded uphill. Dozens followed. The woods had learned the signal. We abandoned the instrument and moved northwest, using the slope rather than the dry stream bed. Daniel marked our route on paper. Maya shut down both GNSS receivers and removed their batteries. We silenced the radios. The forest became quiet. That quiet was not total. Wind moved through the canopy. Water dripped from leaves. A woodpecker called somewhere beyond the ridge. The absence was specific. We no longer heard our own sounds ahead of us. For almost an hour, we made progress. Then, Emmett's knee failed. He had been favoring it since the morning, but on a steep descent, his right leg buckled. He fell against a fallen trunk and twisted his ankle beneath him. The injury didn't appear broken, though swelling began immediately. We wrapped it and gave him a trekking pole. Our pace dropped by half. According to Daniel's paper map, a disused logging spur should have crossed the ridge north of us. If we reached it, we could follow the grade west toward the access road. We climbed slowly. Near the crest, I found an old cut stump. The flat surface was gray with age, but the saw marks were still visible. Another stump appeared 20 yards away, then a shallow roadbed. For once, the terrain matched the map. We turned west. The logging road remained level as it followed the contour. Walking became easier for Emmett. Daniel estimated we were less than a mile from the trucks. A pink ribbon appeared on a branch ahead. Number 23. Maya checked her remaining flagging. She had used only 1 through 16. The duplicate, 17 and 18, had appeared earlier. Ribbons, 19 through 22, remained in her pocket. Number 23 was missing. We removed it and continued. 30 yards later, another ribbon 23 hung from a different tree. Then another. Every marker carried the same number in Maya's handwriting. The road curved around a rocky point. Beyond the curve, a person stood in the center of the grade. At first, I thought it was a trespasser wearing a gray rain jacket. The figure faced away from us, motionless, with one arm raised at shoulder height. Daniel called out. No response. We approached within 60 yards before I understood what I was seeing. It wasn't a person. 2 narrow trees stood several feet apart. A broken branch extended from one trunk. Fog and overlapping shadow filled the space between them, producing the shape of a body. Restricted visibility can create convincing human forms. The brain searches for familiar patterns. Maya took one step right. The figure remained human-shaped. That should not have happened. Changing our angle should have separated the trees and destroyed the illusion. I moved left. The two trunks shifted against the background so the silhouette stayed intact. It wasn't an object. It was an alignment. Every position we occupied created a new line of sight in which unrelated pieces of the forest formed the same figure. The shape raised its second arm. A measurement tone sounded behind us. Daniel said, "Don't stand still." The figure existed only while we occupied the station from which its components aligned. We moved together along the road, and the shape broke apart. A few steps later, new trees overlapped ahead and rebuilt it. The woods weren't placing a creature in our path. They were measuring us from the path. We turned off the logging road and climbed through dense laurel, choosing the most difficult terrain available. A planned survey avoids obstacles whenever possible. We hoped irregular movement would prevent the route from extending cleanly. For a while, it worked. Then Maya stopped. She was staring at the ground. A wooden stake protruded from the soil between her boots. Fresh pink flagging hung from its top. Stamped into a metal cap were the characters PNT 315, May 29. Maya stepped away so quickly she fell. The stake had appeared exactly where the empty impressions had formed beside her earlier. We dug around it with the hatchet. The wood continued more than 2 feet into compacted soil. Fine roots had grown around it. The metal cap showed weathering. It had been in place for years, yet the ribbon was fresh. Daniel pulled Maya upright. "Don't touch any more markers." A radio transmission came from her vest. She had removed the battery. Her own voice said, "I found the road." The transmission was dated by context, not by a timestamp. She sounded exhausted and frightened. "I'm at the old landing. Nathan, answer me." Maya grabbed the radio and threw it downslope. The voice continued from the ground. "I can see your light." It paused. Then, more softly, "You're walking the wrong way." A second radio Daniels answered from inside his pack. "Nathan's walking the wrong way." My radio repeated it. Emmett's followed. All 4 used Maya's voice. The forest had changed its behavior. Earlier, it reproduced instructions and measurements. Now it was creating a conversation designed to separate us. The content wasn't random. An old landing was marked on the western map. If Maya became isolated, reaching it would seem reasonable. The voice offered a recognizable location and claimed visual contact. It understood the same practical logic we did. We removed the radios and smashed them against a rock. The transmissions continued through broken speakers until Daniel submerged the pieces in a muddy pool. As daylight faded, fog rose from the hollows. We had been in the tract for nearly 10 hours. Emmett could barely place weight on his right leg. The paper map showed our position near the western ridge, but none of us trusted distance estimates anymore. We needed a route the phenomenon could not anticipate. Daniel suggested traveling by random compass bearings. That failed because the compasses disagreed. Maya proposed using dice from the emergency kit to choose directions. Random motion might avoid a planned line, but steep terrain made several directions unsafe, and wandering without reference could keep us inside all night. Emmett sat against a tree and watched water drip from the end of a branch. "It doesn't know places," he said. I asked what he meant. "It knows positions. Lines between positions. It keeps giving us points because that's how we're thinking." "We've stopped surveying." "No, we haven't. Every time we choose a destination, we make another line." He was right. We kept selecting visible landmarks, mapped roads, ridges, streams, and estimated bearings. Even when we rejected its markers, we still moved from one definable station to another. The phenomenon wasn't necessarily reading thoughts. It didn't need to. Human movement through difficult terrain is predictable. We choose openings, stable ground, gradual grades, and recognizable features. A survey line formalizes that behavior. The woods had decades, possibly centuries of paths, fences, timber cruises, property boundaries, hunting routes, and logging plans to learn from. I thought about Caroline pouring water through layers of sand and clay. Water doesn't select a destination. It responds continuously to local slope. "We follow no point," I said. Daniel frowned. "Meaning, we move like runoff. No landmarks, no bearing. At every step, choose the lowest adjacent ground. Don't look ahead for the route. That takes us into the hollow." "Yes." "And if it closes, then we change with the slope. It was our only idea. We cut a straight branch for Emmett to use as a stronger support. Daniel and I took turns helping him. Maya walked directly behind us, watching our back trail but refusing to focus on distant features. We moved one step at a time toward locally lower ground. The descent became steep. Loose leaves slid beneath our boots. We entered a drainage filled with boulders and mountain laurel. The fog thickened. Sounds came from every direction. Axes struck trees. Radios clicked. Metal stakes rang beneath hammers. Survey chains dragged across stone. Men and women called distances and bearings using terminology from different eras. 42 links. Set the pin. Backside good. Come left. Station occupied. Some voices sounded close enough to touch. Others echoed from far across the hollow. None addressed us directly. They were records of work. The forest had preserved the process even when the roots and workers were gone. As we descended, the voices organized. Separate calls became a single sequence. A man announced an angle. A woman answered with a distance. Someone hammered a stake. A measurement tone followed. Then a voice I recognized said, "Point 316 established." It was mine. 20 feet ahead, leaves compressed into 2 boot impressions. We did not change course. The lowest ground led directly through them. I stepped into the empty prints. The forest went silent. For 1 second, I felt pressure around both ankles, as if someone else's boots occupied the same space. Then, the sensation released. We continued. Point 317 formed farther down. This time, the impressions matched Daniel's boots. He stepped through them. Point 318 belonged to Emmett. Point 319 belonged to Maya. The phenomenon was attempting to incorporate us even without markers. It didn't need our cooperation. It only needed us to occupy each position. "Spread out," Maya said. "No," Daniel replied. "That's what the voices want." The slope offered no safe alternative. To remain together, we had to pass through the stations as they appeared. Each occupied point completed another measurement. The electronic tones resumed. With every tone, the terrain behind us altered. Boulders that had been 10 feet apart appeared side by side. Saplings aligned into barriers. Openings narrowed. We weren't watching individual trees move. The relationships between them changed whenever we looked away. The route was closing behind us. Ahead, water became audible. A real stream. The drainage opened onto a channel nearly 15 feet wide, swollen from recent rain. The current moved rapidly between dark rocks. We had reached Blackwater Fork. The access road lay somewhere on the opposite side, but crossing in darkness would be risky. The water rose above my knees near the bank and deepened toward the center. We searched downstream for a safer point without selecting a distant landmark. The bank steepened. Upstream, the channel narrowed between rock shelves. A fallen tree spanned the water. Its trunk was large enough to cross on hands and knees. The bark had peeled away, exposing wet wood. Daniel went first. He secured a rope on the opposite bank. Maya followed, then Emmett with the rope around his waist. Halfway across, Emmett stopped. On the far side of the stream, between Daniel and Maya, an empty pair of boot impressions formed in the mud. PNT 320. The measurement tone came from the forest behind us. The fallen trunk shifted. Not physically, its alignment changed. From my position, the tree no longer reached the opposite bank. It appeared to end 6 feet short, suspended over the current. Daniel was still holding the far end. Maya stood on the opposite shore. Both were visible, but the trunk beneath them belonged to a different angle than the one supporting Emmett. We were seeing 2 incompatible routes occupy the same crossing. "Don't look at the far bank," I said. Emmett's injured leg slipped. The rope tightened. Daniel braced against a tree. Maya grabbed the line. I crawled onto the trunk and caught the back of Emmett's jacket. The wood beneath my hands felt solid, though my eyes showed it ending ahead. I closed them. The current roared below. "Move toward Daniel's voice," I said. Daniel gave short instructions. 2 feet forward, hands left, stay low. Without visual reference, Emmett crawled. I followed, pushing against his boots whenever his injured leg failed. The measurement tones accelerated. Invisible stations formed in the mud on both banks. Voices called conflicting directions. Left 6 inches, back toward me, hold, wrong line, return to station. My own voice came from directly below the trunk. Nathan, open your eyes. I kept them closed. Nathan, Caroline is waiting. That almost worked. It wasn't only repeating field instructions anymore. It had heard my conversations near the trucks, perhaps through the open radios. It knew the name I had spoken when calling home. The voice softened. She wants to show you the water. My hand stopped. Emmett kicked my wrist. Keep moving, he said. We reached the opposite bank. When I opened my eyes, the fallen tree extended across the stream exactly as it had before. No gap existed. Daniel cut the rope loose rather than taking time to untie it. We moved away from the water. According to the map, the access road should have been less than half a mile west. We refused to aim for it. We continued following local slope until the terrain began rising, proving we had reached the bottom of the watershed. A gravel surface appeared beneath the leaves. We had found a road. The trees opened to reveal a wide landing with stacks of rotting timber, an overturned fuel drum, and the remains of a loading ramp. Maya stared at it. The old landing. It was the location her future voice had described over the radio. The map showed the landing east of Blackwater Fork. We had crossed west. Either the map was wrong, the road curved across the stream elsewhere, or the landing occupied a position it should not have been able to occupy. A white company truck stood at the far end. Its headlights were on. It looked like Daniel's vehicle. Same model, same utility rack, same dent near the rear wheel. Our real vehicles should have been more than a mile away near the access gate. Daniel approached cautiously. The driver's door was open. Inside, the dashboard clock read 8:47. Daniel checked his watch. It was 8:31. The truck was showing 16 minutes in the future. My total station case rested on the passenger seat. We had abandoned it near the vanished stream. The case was intact. When I opened it, the instrument display was no longer broken. The screen control station near the gate. They continued through the sandstone monument, the false tree positions, the dry stream, the logging road, the witness stakes, and the river crossing. The final entry was PNT 327. Closure error 0.000. A perfect closed traverse. The coordinate for point 327 matched the original control point at the gate. The woods had completed a loop. We were standing where we had begun, even though the landing looked nothing like the gravel opening near our trucks. Maya looked through the windshield. Beyond the headlights, 4 shallow depressions waited in the road. They were arranged in a square around an iron survey pin. Each matched one of us. The route required us to occupy the final station together. Once we did, the loop would close physically, not just mathematically. I don't know what that would have meant. I don't know whether we would have disappeared, become voices along the line, or simply been unable to leave the repeating terrain. Emmett believed his uncle had escaped because he abandoned the route before the final closure. We had continued too far. Daniel backed away from the truck. No one steps near that pin. The headlights flickered. A recording played through the truck's speakers. It began with our arrival that morning. Doors closed. Equipment shifted. Maya read point numbers. Emmett complained about his knee. Daniel reviewed the plan. The recording advanced through the day. We heard the tag being removed from the tree. We heard the first impossible transmission. We heard the instrument break. Then the audio reached events that had not happened. Daniel's voice said, "We can't carry Emmett any farther." Maya answered, "Then we leave him at the truck." Emmett looked at us. The recording continued. My voice said, "Everyone take a station." 4 sets of footsteps entered the mud. A measurement tone sounded. Then no one spoke. The silence lasted nearly a minute. At the end, Caroline's voice came through the speakers. "Dad, you said professionals don't get lost." I swung the hatchet into the dashboard. Plastic shattered. The audio continued through the door speakers. Daniel fired 1 round into the engine compartment. The headlights remained on. The truck wasn't functioning like a vehicle. It was another arranged object, a future position made visible because the traverse expected us to reach it. "We need to introduce error," Maya said. I understood immediately. Every route the phenomenon created closed perfectly. Every tag, station, and repeated instruction drove us toward exact agreement. A real survey can tolerate minor error, but this system appeared unable to accept any. If we could force two incompatible measurements into the closing station, the traverse might fail. We still had two prism poles, a steel tape, one functioning GNSS receiver without a battery, and Daniel's paper map. The electronic tools were useless, but the prism poles could create visible targets. We placed one prism 20 feet north of the closing pin and the other 20 feet south. From the truck, both appeared aligned with the pin because the woods kept adjusting sight lines. I stamped .327 onto two aluminum tags. On the first, I added north. On the second, south. Both claimed to be the same station. Maya attached them to the prism poles. The forest responded immediately. Measurement tones sounded from every direction. Foot impressions formed around the northern prism. Another set formed around the southern prism. Voices argued through the trees. Station occupied, station not found, backsite good, closure exceeds tolerance. The truck headlights swept left and right even though the vehicle remained still. Trees shifted into competing alignments. The human-shaped gap appeared around the northern prism, broke apart, and reformed around the southern one. The phenomenon could predict a route. It could reproduce a position. It could not reconcile two final points with the same identity. Move them, I told Maya. We changed both prism locations continuously. Daniel dragged the northern pole east. I carried the southern pole west. We never allowed either target to remain stationary long enough for the empty footprints to settle. The voices grew louder. Old terminology mixed with modern electronic tones. Chains scraped, axes struck, radios transmitted. Men shouted distances from different centuries. The mud around the iron pin began sinking. The truck's front wheels dropped several inches, as though the ground beneath them had vanished. Emmett leaned against the loading ramp, unable to move quickly. A line of compacted footprints formed behind him. They led toward the northern prism. The forest had assigned him a route. Another line formed behind Maya, leading south. It was separating the crew to resolve the contradiction. Maya's face changed. She turned away from us and began walking toward her footprints. I called her name. She didn't answer. Her eyes remained open, but she moved with the mechanical care of someone following instructions through a survey instrument. Come left, her own voice said from the trees. She adjusted left. Forward 2 feet. She stepped forward. Hold. She stopped inside point 327 north. The northern measurement tone became continuous. Trees closed around her line of sight. For an instant, I could see Maya standing only 30 yards away. Then trunks occupied every gap. Daniel started toward her. I grabbed his arm. Not on the route. We couldn't follow her footprints. Doing so would validate the station. I moved downhill, then sideways, choosing each step by immediate slope. Daniel did the same from the opposite direction. We approached Maya along curving, irregular paths. The forest attempted to create new markers ahead of us, but the positions appeared too slowly. Maya remained motionless beside the prism. Her voice echoed from dozens of places. Point established. Point established. Point established. I reached her first and knocked the prism pole over. The reflective target shattered against a rock. Maya collapsed as if the strength had been removed from her legs. The northern station failed. All measurement tones stopped for half a second. Daniel pulled Maya away. The southern prism remained standing. The woods shifted toward it. Emmett's footprints changed direction. He began walking despite his injured leg. Each step twisted his ankle, but he showed no reaction. I ran toward him without following the printed route. He reached the southern station before I could intercept him. The shape in the trees formed behind his body. This time, I saw what the alignment represented. It was not a human silhouette. It was a surveyor at an instrument. Branches created tripod legs. Two pale trunks formed a bent figure. A dark knot in the central tree resembled an eyepiece directed at Emmett. The woods had been creating an operator. We were the targets. Emmett stood beside the prism and raised one arm as if holding a pole. The measurement tone began. I threw the steel tape. The metal housing struck the prism and knocked it several inches off level. Daniel understood. He grabbed the other end of the tape and ran in the opposite direction. The tape stretched across the final station, marked in feet along one side and meters along the other. We pulled until it crossed the iron pin diagonally. I shouted one distance. Daniel shouted a different one. Maya, recovering on the ground, called a third. 3 incompatible measurements occupied the same line. The voices in the woods repeated all of them. 38.6 feet, 11.4 meters, 41 feet. The arithmetic did not agree. The traverse report on the instrument screen flickered. Closure error, 0.000. Closure error, 2.347. Closure error, 19.882. Closure error, 1 resolved. The headlights went out. The truck disappeared. It didn't drive away or fade. The arrangement that had allowed us to perceive it failed. One moment, the vehicle occupied the landing. The next, we were looking at trees, brush, and a narrow gravel road. The survey pin remained. A crack opened in the soil around it. The pin tilted, then sank out of sight. Wind moved through the forest. Not a gentle current. A sudden pressure traveled across the ridge, bending treetops in a widening circle. Branches snapped. Leaves lifted from the ground. Fog tore apart. Every repeated voice spoke at once. Then the route released us. The landing vanished from alignment. We were standing in the gravel opening beside the real access gate. Our 3 vehicles waited where we had left them. The control point established that morning stood 10 feet away. The dashboard clock in Daniel's truck read 8:47, the exact time displayed by the false truck. Emmett collapsed near the gate. Maya vomited beside the road and remained disoriented for several minutes. Daniel unlocked his vehicle with shaking hands. I activated the satellite messenger and sent an emergency request. This time, the message transmitted immediately. The sheriff's office and volunteer rescue crew reached us less than an hour later. Emmett was transported to a hospital with severe ligament damage and a fractured bone near his ankle. Maya suffered dehydration, bruising, and what doctors described as acute stress. Daniel had a cut across his forehead that none of us remembered him receiving. I had deep circular bruises around both ankles. They matched the pressure I had felt when stepping into the empty station. The official search began the following morning. Deputies found the sandstone monument, the scarred hemlock, and the trail cameras. They did not find the shattered total station, the duplicated ribbons, the logging landing, the false truck, or the marked stakes. The stream where water vanished beneath the oak appeared normal. It continued downhill without interruption. The fallen tree remained across Blackwater Fork, but investigators found no sign that 4 people had crossed it. The mud on either bank was smooth. The trail camera seals were intact. The recording showed us arriving at the monument, installing the cameras, and removing the memory cards. After we left the frame, the cameras continued recording. For the next 6 hours, nothing visible entered the clearing. The sandstone monument changed position anyway. Every 11 minutes, it appeared several feet farther east. The video did not show it moving. One frame placed it in the original position. The next frame placed it somewhere else. By sunset, the stone stood nearly half a mile from the camera. That should have carried it completely out of view. Instead, the camera continued showing the monument centered in the frame, while the entire forest changed around it. At 8:47 p.m., 4 human-shaped depressions appeared in the leaves. The image froze. All 3 cameras stopped at the same second. Daniel submitted the footage, equipment logs, tags, and witness statements to the property company. Their legal department classified the incident as possible criminal interference combined with environmental disorientation. The project was canceled. The timber tract was later sold as part of a larger land exchange. The new owner closed the western access road and removed the gate. Public records show no active harvesting plan for that section. Emmett required surgery and never returned to full-time fieldwork. He refused to discuss the old story about his uncle again. Before moving to Tennessee, he mailed me a small envelope. Inside was a faded blue ribbon tied with a doubled slip knot. He had kept it since 1981. Written on the fabric in black marker was the number 17. Maya left surveying. She now works with municipal mapping systems in a city where most control points are set in concrete. We speak occasionally, but she refuses to enter large wooded areas. Even public parks make her uncomfortable if trails intersect more than once. Daniel continued working for another year. Then he closed the company. He gave me the recovered aluminum tags before he retired. Laboratory testing confirmed they came from our custom batch. The tree growth samples proved both tags had been enclosed before the manufacturer produced that alloy stock. No one could explain that contradiction. There were additional camera frames and 2 audio files connected to the investigation that were never made public. Longer case materials and members-only accounts are kept for listeners who support the channel and want to examine what was left out. The detail that matters here is that one recording continued after every visible person had left the tract. For 43 minutes, the microphone captured ordinary forest sounds. Then, my voice began calling measurements. I described a line starting at the sandstone monument and traveling east through points we never established. At each station, an unknown voice answered, "Occupied." The final exchange was different. My recorded voice said, "Closing on original point." The unknown voice replied, "Original point no longer exists. I stopped doing remote boundary work after Blackwater Fork. I moved into utility mapping and construction layout, where roads remain visible and control points are surrounded by pavement. I made it home for Caroline's science competition. She demonstrated how water changed direction when clay blocked one part of her model. When the normal outlet closed, the flow spread sideways until it found another path. She won second place. I never told her how closely that project matched the reason I came home. For several years I believed the incident was over. Then, last October, a survey crew contacted me through Daniel's old company email. They had been hired to retrace a small residential parcel 30 miles north of Blackwater Fork. While searching for a buried iron pin, they found an aluminum witness tag beneath the bark of a mature oak. The tag carried their project number. It also carried my name. The date stamped beneath it was the following Saturday. They asked whether I had ever worked that property. I told them no. Then I asked what number they had assigned to the corner. Point 327. They sent me a photograph. The lettering was uneven. The first digit had been struck harder than the others. The spacing matched my hand. Behind the oak, blue ribbons continued into the timber. The crew had already followed 11 of them. I called immediately and told them to leave every instrument where it was, ignore every marked route, and move downhill without choosing a destination. The foreman listened until I mentioned the ribbons. Then he became quiet. "We didn't put those up," he said. "I know. How do you know?" Before I could answer, a total station tone sounded through his phone. The foreman whispered that their instrument was turned off. Another tone came from farther inside the woods. Then my own voice spoke through the connection, calm and clear. "Left 6 inches." The call ended. Search teams found the crew's vehicle beside the road that evening. All 3 surveyors had returned safely, but none remembered calling me. They insisted they had abandoned the property before noon and had never located point 327. The photograph remained on my phone. Its metadata says it was taken 11 days after the search. Sometimes, late at night, the coordinate attached to that image changes. It moves a few feet east each time. I no longer check where it is going. I know what happens when the line reaches its final station. And somewhere in the Appalachian woods, a route with my name on it is still trying to close.